Chapter 280. Bai Luyu smiled at Bai Luyi before walking out. Bai Luyi naturally stepped aside and followed behind Bai Luyu, arriving at the back of the mountain. On the grassy hillside, Qin Wendian sat cross-legged. Upon seeing Bai Luyu, he couldn't help but smile. Does Senior have any instructions for me? Grandmaster Qin, it's so difficult to even meet you. Bai Luyu exclaimed in a loud voice. The way he addressed Qin Wendian as Grandmaster Qin contained hints of mockery. Senior must be joking. It's just that Junior has been in closed-door seclusion these few days. Little E was worried that I would be disturbed, hence she stopped Senior. If she offended you in any way, please forgive her. Qin Wendian still had a smile on his face, ignoring Bai Luyu's sarcasm. As the saying goes, no one would slap a smiling face. However, Bai Luyu continued, Grandmaster Qin is in closed-door seclusion? Could it be that you've already broken through to the 4th ranked? Why can't we meet? Qin Wendian continued smiling, not replying. Bai Luyu couldn't help but to add, currently, there are many guests visiting my White Deer Institute, and among them, there are even 4th-ranked Grandmasters. Grandmaster Qin, would you be willing to give us the face to meet with them? Qin Wendian's expression turned solemn. I, Qin, don't know anyone in the Moon continent, why would there be people wanting to pay a visit? Qin Wendian curiously asked. As the sound of his voice faded, an expression of interest appeared on Bai Luyu's face, laughing at Qin Wendian for not knowing the immensity of the heavens and earth. He even dared to use the word, pay a visit. Not, pay a visit, I'm asking you to meet them. Bai Luyu emphasized the word, pay a visit. Oh. Qin Wendian nodded. After which, he fell silent. These grandmasters really came at the right time. He glanced at Bai Luyi, and upon seeing the worried expression on her face, he instantly understood. Most probably, this was because of the ancient scroll. If not, there wouldn't be any 4th-ranked grandmasters wanting to meet with him. Bai Luyu couldn't help but to continue mocking Qin Wendian. Grandmaster Qin, are you still not preparing to move? Why must we move? Qin Wendian had a strange expression on his face as he stared at Bai Luyu. You. Bai Luyu's gaze froze as he stared at Qin Wendian. There are so many 4th-ranked grandmasters wanting to meet with you. Tell me, why did you make a move? Could it be that you want all of them to meet with you? Bai Luyu's tone had already turned cold, yet Bai Luyi sarcastically interjected, Uncle Yu, I'm sure you're very clear of the reason why they want to meet with Qin Wendian. Why do you still want to come here personally to persuade them? Bai Luyu's motive was extremely clear. He wanted Qin Wendian to meet with those people, and after that, he wanted Qin Wendian to feel the pressure of the outside world. Only then would Qin Wendian submit to his father, Bai Lu Tong, in order to protect himself. Humph, Bai Luyu coldly snorted, lobbyist? I'm only here to inform him. What do you mean by lobbyist? Could it be that he wants to avoid meeting with all the grandmasters? Senior must be joking. Why would I, Qin, avoid meeting with them? Qin Wendian faintly replied, the smile on his face gradually vanishing. Bai Luyu coldly laughed as he glanced at Qin Wendian. If they don't want to meet, they don't want to meet. What's there to avoid? Qin Wendian continued. The cold smile on Bai Luyu's face froze as he stared at Qin Wendian, only to see Qin Wendian continuing, Senior, you've already said it yourself. It's them who want to meet with me, not me, the other way round. Bai Luyu stared at Qin Wendian. What an interesting fellow. Do you mean that you want all the grandmasters to pay their respects to you? Bai Luyu teased. I don't dare to use the word, pay their respects. Qin Wendian shook his head. It's just that Senior only said that there's a 4th-ranked grandmaster who wishes to meet with me. Firstly, you didn't mention the name of that grandmaster, and secondly, you didn't even mention the reason why he wants to meet with me. I don't have anything to ask of them, nor have I received any favors from them. If I do that, wouldn't I be belittling myself? Could it be that Senior likes to belittle himself in this manner? Bai Luyu's eyes narrowed as he laughed, you have a sharp tongue. Since that's the case, I shall inform the other Grandmasters and tell them to pay their respects to Grandmaster Qin. As the sound of his voice faded, Bai Lu Yu flicked his sleeves and departed. The young man behind him swept his gaze over to Qin Wendian, his eyes gleaming with sharpness. After the three of them left, Bai Lu Yi's beautiful eyes flickered with worry. She turned to Qin Wendian. During the time you were in closed-door seclusion, there were rumors circulating that you obtained the ancient scroll of the Ascendant. Bai Lu Yu is the son of Bai Lu Tong, and I'm sure you're very clear of his motive for coming here. Today, a group of Grandmasters came here, and they're extremely ferocious. Qin Wendian nodded his head lightly as he stood up. Seeing the haggard look on Bai Lu Yi's face, he couldn't help but smile. Don't worry, if they go too far, I won't let them off easy. Bai Lu Yi's beautiful eyes brightened as she stared at the smile on Qin Wendian's face. Did you really break through this time around? Qin Wendian smiled as he nodded his head. Really? Bai Lu Yi asked again. Yes. Qin Wendian nodded his head again. Fourth ranked, you're not lying to me? Bai Lu Yi asked again, the light in her eyes growing brighter and brighter. Fourth ranked, a 19-year-old fourth-ranked Grandmaster. Qin Wendian rolled his eyes as he walked over and rapped Bai Lu Yi on her head. Absolutely true, I'm not lying to you. That's great. Bai Lu Yi's countenance was filled with excitement. She couldn't help but jump up as she hugged Qin Wendian tightly. Heavens, I've actually seen a 19-year-old fourth-ranked Grandmaster with my own eyes. Is he going to create history in the Moon continent? This is too crazy, Qin Wendian, you're too crazy. Qin Wendian didn't expect Bai Lu Yi to be so excited. Feeling the softness on his arm, Qin Wendian's eyes stared unblinkingly at the pure and innocent girl. As though sensing Qin Wendian's gaze, Bai Lu Yi froze for a moment. Her beautiful eyes flickered as she glanced down at her own body leaning on Qin Wendian's arm. Instantly, a blush appeared on her face. Coupled with that pure and innocent countenance of hers, it caused Qin Wendian to stare in a daze. Although he was already used to beauties, the pure and innocent Bai Lu Yi in front of him right now was simply too beautiful. The excitement in her eyes was pure and without any impurities. Wait here, I'll help you blow things up a little more. Bai Lu Yi's eyes lit up as she sprinted away. As though sensing something, Bai Lu Yi rubbed her temples as she turned back to glare at Qin Wendian. Bastard, how could you be so strong? Only now did I realize. Qin Wendian was completely speechless. After which, he only saw Bai Lu Yi smiling sweetly at him as she sped away. Blow things up a little more. Qin Wendian blinked his eyes as he stared at the graceful silhouette of Bai Lu Yi. This lass really wanted to see the world in chaos. Not long after, Qin Wendian saw a group of silhouettes flying over. Many of these people had white hair and white beards, exuding an air of immortality. There were also a few who had amiable expressions on their faces, their eyes gleaming with sharpness. However, regardless of their external appearances, the aura they exuded was the same, arrogance. Powerful divine inscriptionists had always been worshipped and respected by others. The major powers of the Yuanfu continent were all willing to pay a hefty price to nurture them, as long as they were willing. Fourth-ranked divine inscriptionists would never lack wealth, nor would they lack fame. No matter where they went, they would be like the moon surrounded by stars. Even now, there were several old men with cultivation bases at the upper third level of Yuanfu standing behind them, protecting them. For those with limited achievements in the martial path, if they had talent in the Tao of divine inscriptions, they would spend a large amount of time researching divine inscriptions. Hence, even if they were fourth-ranked divine inscriptionists, they might only have a cultivation base at the Yuanfu realm. Hence, they needed guards, and naturally, there would be people willing to be their guards. It was inevitable that they would be filled with arrogance. When they appeared in front of Qin Wendian could clearly feel the intense aura exuded by these divine inscriptionists. Two of them are Heavenly Dipper sovereigns, while the rest are all at the Yuanfu realm. The weakest among them is only at the 5th level of Yuanfu. Qin Wendian swept his gaze over, instantly knowing the cultivation bases of these people. He could tell that they were at the Yuanfu realm, but he couldn't tell that they were at the Yuanfu realm. One of the Heavenly Dipper sovereigns was someone that Qin Wentian was acquainted with. Senior pays his respects to Grandmaster Fenrir. Qin Wentian politely bowed to one of the Heavenly Dipper sovereigns. Back then during the exchange in the star-seizing manor, it was none other than Grandmaster Fenrir who was the judge. Grandmaster Fenrir smiled as he nodded his head. His gaze was fixed on Qin Wentian's surroundings as a sharp glint flickered in his eyes. His heart pounded violently, as though he had just seen something extremely shocking. Back then when we parted at the star-seizing manor, I could already tell that you were an extraordinary individual. Now, you've truly met with a heaven-sent opportunity. Naturally, this opportunity was also obtained through your own hard work. Congratulations. Grandmaster Fenrir smiled and nodded to Qin Wentian, treating him with respect. His tone was calm, and there was no hint of arrogance in it. Qin Wentian could easily sense the closeness radiating from Grandmaster Fenrir. He also understood the meaning behind Grandmaster Fenrir's words. He smiled and nodded his head in reply, Junior's luck isn't bad. Back then when Grandmaster Fenrir imparted the divine inscriptions to me, Junior also benefited greatly from it. After speaking, Qin Wentian bowed again, appearing extremely sincere. Good. Grandmaster Fenrir smiled as he nodded his head. He shifted his feet slightly to the side, as though he was intentionally putting some distance between himself and the others. Yet in his heart, he couldn't help but sigh. This young man was definitely not an ordinary individual. In the future, he would definitely transform into a dragon that soared to the 9 heavens. Right now, he could only befriend Qin Wentian and not offend him. However, the others didn't notice Grandmaster Fenrir's casual actions. They also didn't understand the deep meaning behind his simple words. Not only that, some of them even thought that Grandmaster Fenrir was hinting that Qin Wentian had obtained the Ascendant's inheritance. And Qin Wentian had actually admitted it. As such, the light in their eyes grew even brighter as they stared at Qin Wentian. The way they looked at Qin Wentian was as though they were looking at their prey. The inheritance of the Ascendant, today, they had to force this brat to hand it over. Chapter 281. Swords drawn and bows bent, this was the perfect word to describe the situation Qin Wentian was currently facing. Bailu Yu had also arrived, he was the one who brought these grandmasters here. However, he had an ulterior motive, he didn't wish for Qin Wentian to hand over the ancient scroll. He only wanted to make Qin Wentian feel pressured. When Qin Wentian couldn't withstand the pressure, he would naturally give Qin Wentian a chance. Hence, Bailu Yu merely stood at the side, a cold smile curling his lips. In such a situation, he wanted to see how Qin Wentian would handle it. But at this moment, the sound of footsteps drifted over. Bailu Yu turned his head, only to see a group of people walking over. He couldn't help but be stunned, it was actually the Great Elder, Bailu Yi, Bailu Shan and Bailu Jing. This lass, did she think that by bringing the Great Elder here, she would be able to help Qin Wentian? Bailu Yu naturally knew that this was Bailu Yi's doing. He bowed slightly to the large-eyed elder as he called out, Great Elder. The large-eyed elder casually nodded his head, yet his heart was filled with bewilderment. Bailu Yi had told him that there would be a good show to watch here, hence, he decided to follow her here. Father. Bailu Yu suddenly noticed Bailu Tong also walking over. Bailu Tong nodded his head lightly as he glanced at the large-eyed elder. He knew that the Great Elder would be here, hence he decided to follow along. He wouldn't allow Bailu Yi to spoil his plans. The other grandmasters didn't rush to speak. They remained silent for a moment, and upon seeing that the large-eyed elder and Bailu Tong had no intention to speak, many thoughts flashed through their minds. They weren't in a hurry, so Qin Wentian wasn't in a hurry as well. He simply stood there quietly. However, with so many seniors trying to force him to abdicate, how could he not be in a good mood? Finally, an old man with sunken eyes and a high nose bridge was the first to lose his cool. He stared at Qin Wentian with narrowed eyes akin to a venomous snake, causing Qin Wentian to feel extremely uncomfortable. Qin Wentian. This old man had a cultivation base at the 7th level of Yuanfu, and behind him were 3 guards at the 9th level of Yuanfu. His eyes narrowed as he coldly laughed. You want us to come here personally to see you? This is the first time I've seen someone as arrogant as you. Senior, you must be joking. Qin Wentian pointed at the path behind the old man and smiled. What do you mean? The other party stared at Qin Wentian. I didn't mean for Senior to come and see me. I think Senior must have misunderstood. The main road is there, Senior. Qin Wentian smiled and pointed to the road ahead. What he meant was obvious. Senior, you must be joking. I didn't ask you to come to see me. You came to see me yourself. If you don't want to see me, the road is right there. Go ahead. You. How could the other party not understand the meaning behind Qin Wentian's words? His sunken eyes deepened, and a cold glint burst forth from them. Sharp-tongued. You wanted us to come here, but now you want me to leave just like that? Isn't this too ridiculous? You overestimate yourself too much. The other party continued. Qin Wentian's eyes flashed with sharpness when he heard the other party's words. Are you crazy? As the sound of Qin Wentian's voice faded, the expression of the old man stiffened. Did the other party just say that he was crazy in public? Ever since he stepped into the ranks of 4th-ranked divine inscriptionists, he had never been humiliated before. Behind him, 3 silhouettes stepped out, exuding a terrifying aura as they gushed towards Qin Wentian. As long as the old man gave the order, they would immediately act against Qin Wentian. I'll give you a chance to apologize. The countenance of the old man turned ice-cold, so cold that it pierced into the bones. It was still too early for the contest over the ancient scroll of the Ascendant, but now, he wanted an explanation from Qin Wentian. Seems like not only are you crazy, your sickness isn't light at all. The smile on Qin Wentian's face faded. His eyes swept over to the newcomers as his gaze gradually turned sharp. How could he not be angered by these people? But since they were all divine inscriptionists, he might as well try to be polite before resorting to violence. Since the other party wasn't going to be polite, what did he, Qin Wentian, have to fear? Impudent! The 3 of them roared in rage as they took a step forward. However, Qin Wentian only spoke, if you take another step forward, I'll kill you. As the sound of the word kill faded, a bone-chilling killing intent gushed forth from Qin Wentian, causing the entire space to be filled with a bone-chilling killing intent. The hearts of the 3 involuntarily shuddered when they saw Qin Wentian's gaze sweeping over. Even with their cultivation bases, they could feel a terrifying coldness from Qin Wentian's eyes. It was as though the sharpness of a blade was slicing through their minds, piercing into their bones. As the sound of Qin Wentian's voice faded, the entire hillside instantly fell into silence. A light breeze gusted by, causing the green grass on the ground to sway lightly. Only to see Qin Wentian staring at the 4th-ranked divine inscriptionist. Each and every one of his gazes was akin to a cold blade, piercing into the eyes of the 4th-ranked divine inscriptionist. I've already given you face by addressing you as senior, yet you don't know how to conduct yourself. Since you don't want to listen to my kind words, I, Qin, will repeat my intentions one more time. Qin Wentian coldly continued, I, Qin Wentian, am cultivating here. You can come and go as you please. What does this have to do with me? Please don't use the tone of I invited you here to speak to me. Firstly, I, Qin, am not your junior, and secondly, I have nothing to ask of you. Why would I invite you here? If you have nothing else to say, just scram. The domineering tone of Qin Wentian's words caused the people in the surroundings to be stunned, as their eyes flickered with uncertainty. Arrogance, truly arrogance. Although there was some logic in Qin Wentian's words, in this world, the strong reign supreme. Who wouldn't respect a 4th-ranked divine inscriptionist? Yet he, Qin Wentian, directly told the divine inscriptionist that he was the one who came to see him, not the one who invited him here. If you have nothing else to say, just scram. One could say that the words spoken by Qin Wendian had completely offended a fourth-ranked divine inscriptionist. Even if Qin Wendian was fine today, if a fourth-ranked divine inscriptionist wanted to deal with a Yuanfu cultivator like Qin Wendian, it would be too much for him to handle. The large-eyed elder was also baffled by Qin Wendian's words. Where did this little fellow's self-confidence come from? Glancing at Bai Lu Yi beside him, Bai Lu Yi's beautiful eyes flickered with a strange light, as though she was at ease. Her confidence in Qin Wendian didn't seem to be any less than Qin Wendian himself. Grandmaster Fenrir, on the other hand, had a smile on his face. He didn't say anything as he quietly watched the development unfold. He also wanted to see how Qin Wendian would deal with the situation today. As for the high-nosed elder, his countenance turned extremely sinister after hearing Qin Wendian's words. If there's nothing else, just scram. Was this something a first-ranked Yuanfu cultivator would say to him? If he took another step forward, he would die. Where did his confidence come from? Maybe, he had obtained the ancient scroll of the Ascendant, allowing him to inscribe top-tier third-ranked divine inscriptions as well as formations. However, with him here, did Qin Wendian really think that he could borrow the power of formations or divine inscriptions to kill his follower? Brother Liang, the temper of the youngsters these days is really bad. A black-faced middle-aged man laughed. Brother Liang was none other than the high-nosed elder. If it wasn't for the fact that we are in the White Deer Institute, given Brother Liang's temper, he would have died 10 times over. The black-faced middle-aged man continued. The high-nosed elder narrowed his eyes. Regardless of whether they were in the White Deer Institute or not, why would they waste so much time talking nonsense with Qin Wendian? They would directly kill him and seize the ancient scroll. But now, they all understood that since the White Deer Institute allowed them to enter, it meant that the White Deer Institute had yet to force Qin Wendian to hand over the ancient scroll. Similarly, the White Deer Institute wanted to use them to threaten Qin Wendian. Hence, these people temporarily decided to wait and see. The high-nosed elder surnamed Liang was the most impatient of them all. Hence, he took the initiative to make things difficult for Qin Wendian. Indeed, this brat doesn't respect his seniors, he should be punished for his rudeness. Another person spoke. This person stroked his white beard, exuding an air of immortality. This old man was already over 150 years old and had immersed himself in the study of divine inscriptions for a long time. He had also stepped into the fourth-ranked divine inscriptionist realm for quite a few years, and there were many who knew him in the Moon continent. Many divine inscriptionists had received his guidance before. Hence, this old man was someone of virtue and prestige. That's what Old Song said as well. The black-faced middle-aged man laughed. The high-nosed elder glanced at Old Song. Old Song, how should we punish this brat? Does Fenrir have any opinions? Old Song stroked his beard as he turned his gaze onto Grandmaster Fenrir. Don't ask me. Back then, I had a friendly encounter with him. Today, I'm only here to take a look. I won't interfere in your matters. Fenrir smiled as he waved his hands, not getting involved in this matter. Qin Wendian was brimming with confidence, he must have already made preparations. He was more than happy to watch the show. In that case, the ancient scroll of the Ascendant. Old Song placed his hand on his beard, his eyes gleaming with sharpness. That has nothing to do with me. If you guys can obtain it, just go ahead. Fenrir waved his hands. Good, good. Old Song stroked his beard as he laughed. They had one less strong opponent. This brat was so disrespectful to Grandmaster Liang and the other Grandmasters. He deserves death. At this moment, a voice drifted over from the back of the crowd. The black-faced middle-aged man smiled. Gauze, it seems like you have some ideas. I've long recognized this brat. He doesn't respect his elders, and has the ambition of a wolf. If he were to obtain the ancient scroll of the Ascendant, it would be a waste of a heavenly treasure. This brat deserves death, and I'm sure the White Deer Institute won't hold it against him. Gauze's voice was ice-cold. Gauze, how shameless can you be? Bai Lui cursed as she turned her gaze onto Gauze. Back then, he had some grudges with Qin Wentian, but Qin Wentian didn't hold it against him. Yet now, Gauze actually wanted these people to kill Qin Wentian. How ruthless. Miss Bai Lui, it seems like your heart aches for your lover. But I, Gauze, believe that the White Deer Institute will understand right from wrong. Gauze wasn't angered, he casually laughed. The crowd shifted their gazes onto the large-eyed elder and Bai Lu Tong, as though they had already discussed how to deal with Qin Wentian. Next, they just had to wait for the White Deer Institute to express their stance. Bai Lu Tong's gaze shifted onto Qin Wentian as he coldly stated, that will depend on what he chooses. Evidently, Bai Lu Tong wanted to push the pressure onto Qin Wentian, forcing him to make a decision. These grandmasters wanted to kill him. What did he want, the ancient scroll of the Ascendant, or his life? Qin Wentian stared at the people before him. Each and every one of them was a person of virtue and prestige, deciding his life and death as they chatted. It was as though his life wasn't even worth mentioning. And that Gauze, he actually dared to throw stones at Qin Wentian when he was down. Qin Wentian swept his gaze over the crowd as he slowly spoke. After speaking so much nonsense, have you finally revealed your true intentions? What a bunch of sanctimonious fellows. I, Qin, don't have the ancient scroll of the Ascendant, and even if I did, it wouldn't be your turn. Chapter 282. As the sound of Qin Wentian's voice faded, Bai Lu Tong faintly glanced at him. Qin Wentian, it's a good thing that you're hot-blooded and don't fear death. However, there are many times when there are better choices to be made. Why must you choose the path of death for the sake of venting your anger? No matter what, you are a guest of the White Deer Institute. If you are willing to hand over the ancient scroll to the Institute, I'm sure the other grandmasters won't continue to make things difficult for you. Bai Lu Tong's countenance was calm, as though he was thinking for Qin Wentian's sake. However, he chose to speak only now. One could very well imagine his intentions. The countenances of those grandmasters all changed as they silently cursed at this old fox. Senior, you worry too much. Junior is still young, how would I want to die? Qin Wentian calmly replied. Handing over the ancient scroll to Bai Lu Tong. Taking it for himself would be more appropriate. Oh. Bai Lu Tong's countenance flickered before he smiled. Since this is the case, I won't try to persuade you any further. After speaking, he closed his eyes, as though he was prepared to accept the actions of these grandmasters. The high-nosed old Liang, eccentric Song, the black-faced middle-aged man and the rest exchanged glances, as hints of laughter could be seen flickering in their eyes. The high-nosed old Liang stared at Qin Wentian, his sunken eyes narrowed as he sinisterly stated, the ancient scroll of the Ascendant naturally belongs to the strongest. Since a junior like you wants to take it for yourself, only death awaits you. As the sound of his voice faded, 3 protectors stepped out, moving towards Qin Wentian. I've said it before, take one more step and you will die. Qin Wentian stared at the 3 protectors, his eyes flashing with a golden light. Instantly, the 3 protectors felt their heads shuddering, as though they were struck by a powerful attack. Instantly, the will of their mandates gushed forth, as a pressure as heavy as a mountain gushed forth. One of the protectors grabbed out with his palm, and instantly, a gigantic blood-colored palm the size of a mountain appeared in the air, causing Qin Wentian's blood to flow unimpeded. Boom! That blood-colored gigantic palm slammed down, causing an explosive sound to ring out. Just when everyone thought that Qin Wentian had died, they only saw Qin Wentian still standing there with a smile on his face, calmly looking at them. Those divine inscriptionists all frowned. They could feel that Qin Wentian's body was gradually turning blurry, as though he wasn't a corporeal entity. Although he was right in front of them, he didn't seem to have a body of flesh and blood. Fenrir rubbed his chin as a faint smile appeared on his face. Divine inscriptionists all had their own specialties. Some were proficient in divine inscriptions, some were proficient in formations, some were proficient in weaponsmithing, and some were proficient in the art of puppetry. Although both of them were fourth-ranked grandmasters, the disparity in their attainments in all aspects could be immense. Fenrir was extremely proficient in divine inscriptions, as well as divine inscriptions formations. Not only that, as a heavenly dipper sovereign, his perception was exceedingly sharp. He had long since discovered that there was a grand formation inscribed by Qin Wentian here. This formation was an illusory formation, where the illusory and real coexisted. This illusory formation was a fourth-ranked formation. Not only that, what made Fenrir even more astonished was that this fourth-ranked illusory formation had no offensive capabilities. Hence, the illusory energy contained within it was extremely powerful, making it extremely difficult to see through. Hence, the other fourth-ranked grandmasters didn't even notice the existence of this fourth-ranked illusory formation. They also didn't realize that the true purpose of this fourth-ranked illusory formation was to conceal the divine inscriptions within. Those divine inscriptions could be activated at the slightest touch. Fenrir couldn't help but break out in cold sweat for these so-called fourth-ranked grandmasters. How much determination did Qin Wentian have today? Illusory formation. Those grandmasters weren't mediocre characters. At this moment, they could also tell that there was an extremely well-hidden illusory formation in this place. Old Song. The sharp-nosed old Liang stared at the esteemed Old Song with a questioning expression on his face. Old Song was someone who had dabbled in the art of formations. Old Song was frowning as he narrowed his eyes. An ominous feeling welled up in his heart. He had dabbled in the Tao of formations, and now that there was an illusory formation hidden in front of him, he actually couldn't see through it. This was sufficient to cause him to be on high alert. Staring at the smiling young man in front of him, Old Song continued, "Don't worry, this formation is illusory, we can't attack it. Kill him. Kill." The sharp-nosed old Liang spat out another command upon hearing Old Song's words. The three experts dashed forwards, aiming for Qin Wentian's silhouette. Regardless of whether his opponent was real or illusory, they would still destroy him. However, at this moment, a terrifying whistling sound abruptly rang out. The eyes of the three experts narrowed as they stared at the ground beneath their feet. Over there, a resplendent light suddenly flashed. That was the glow of divine inscriptions. Shio, shio, shio. The terrifying whistling sound of swords instantly transformed into an ear-piercing sound. The three experts only saw tens of thousands of sword chi converging together to form a spiraling tempest that swept towards them. The might of the tempest formed by tens of thousands of sword chi was extremely terrifying. It was akin to a meat grinder, capable of annihilating everything in its path. They instantly soared into the air, wanting to evade it. Boom! All of a sudden, a sound reverberated through the air. Another resplendent divine inscription lit up beneath their feet. They only felt that there was a force of millions of kilograms pulling at their feet. Their entire bodies were incomparably heavy, and they were actually unable to rise into the air. In an extremely short instant, the spiraling tempest formed by the sword chi revolved around the three of them, enveloping them within. Expressions of terror could be seen on the faces of the three experts as they howled in rage, no. Their bodies trembled violently, as despair could be seen in their eyes. The spiraling tempest that enveloped them was definitely an attack at the pinnacle of Yuanfu, and right now, it was engulfing them. "Save me!" One of them screamed in a frenzy, as he turned his head and stared at the sharp-nosed old Liang. The look of despair in his eyes caused the hearts of those who saw it to tremble. "Stop!" The sharp-nosed old Liang roared in rage. However, the spiraling tempest formed by the sword chi had completely engulfed the three experts. The whistling sound of the sword chi continued, and occasionally, a drop of crimson blood would splatter out. When the tempest finally calmed down, there was nothing left in that direction. The three experts at the pinnacle of Yuanfu vanished like smoke, vanishing from the vision of the spectators. The countenances of the spectators were all extremely unsightly. There were so many grandmasters here, yet 3 of them had been killed by Qin Wentian using the Tao of divine inscriptions. Their gazes turned to Qin Wentian, who was still standing there. Only now did they realize that this young man wasn't as weak as they had imagined. 4th-ranked Grandmaster. Qin Wentian stared at the sharp-nosed old Liang, as a mocking light flashed in his eyes. Do you dare to break my divine inscriptions? Old Liang's countenance was extremely unsightly to behold. He turned his head and glanced at eccentric Song, only to see eccentric Song narrowing her eyes in contemplation. Earlier, the divine inscriptions were concealed by his illusory formation, and it's true that the formation didn't have any offensive capabilities. Those 3 experts died to the hidden divine inscriptions. I'm sure you've already seen it, and it wasn't just a single peak tier, 3rd-ranked divine inscriptions. Qin Wentian had long since prepared for this. Their deaths were all worth it. Eccentric Song calmly stated, while old Liang's countenance turned ashen. Was this considered using his protectors to probe Qin Wentian's strength? This old fart was truly scheming and farsighted. Is that so? Since you've already found out, does Grandmaster want to test it out? Qin Wentian indifferently stated to eccentric Song. Eccentric Song stroked his beard as he laughed, just a mere 3rd-ranked divine inscription, there's no need for me to act personally. Gauze, you go and break it. Qin Wentian laughed, letting Gauze break it. Old fox. Gauze cursed in his heart when he heard eccentric Song's words. Although he was extremely unhappy with Qin Wentian, he couldn't help but feel fear in his heart when he saw the scene earlier. He knew that it would be extremely dangerous for him to break the divine inscription. The other Grandmasters didn't reply, they merely watched on calmly. At this moment, their hearts were filled with bewilderment. That illusory formation could even fool their eyes. Was it really a 3rd-ranked formation? However, they would rather believe that there were some unique formations that could hide it perfectly, preventing them from seeing through it. If not, if it was a 4th-ranked formation, then, however, they felt that they were worrying too much. How could it be so easy to break through from the 3rd-ranked to the 4th-ranked? How old was Qin Wentian? It was impossible. Without at least 10 years of accumulation, it would be impossible. The inheritance of the Ascendant is truly powerful. Bai Lu Yu faintly commented. Momentarily, the eyes of the crowd brightened. That's right, Qin Wentian must have comprehended a powerful formation from the ancient scroll of the Ascendant, causing them to be unable to see through it. Gauze, speed up. The black-faced middle-aged man turned his gaze onto Gauze as he coldly stated, if you kill this brat, we will not mistreat you. Gauze's countenance was extremely unsightly to behold, but he still nodded his head. Numerous puppets appeared before him, and he followed behind them as they advanced towards Qin Wentian. Kill. Gauze spat out a single word. Momentarily, the puppets frenziedly dashed out, while he himself stood there motionlessly. Although the killing intent radiating from him was extremely sharp, he was still extremely cautious. Abruptly, the ground beneath the illusory formation lit up with a resplendent radiance as a terrifying aura radiated forth. A terrifying great rock appeared in the air, lunging towards the puppets. Gauze stared at the divine inscription in front of him, as his perception gushed out, his eyes gleaming with sharpness. This divine inscription is extremely easy to break. Gauze, why are you still not moving forward? The black-faced middle-aged man coldly stated. Gauze nodded his head, it wasn't difficult to break the divine inscription in front of him. His steps were extremely slow, as he maintained his vigilance. However, when he took the 3rd step, before he could even get close to the divine inscription, another divine inscription lit up beneath his feet. It was unknown how many divine inscriptions were hidden within this formation. Bzzz. A whistling sound rang out from below. Gauze's countenance instantly paled. He was walking on the divine inscription, yet he didn't even notice the divine inscription beneath his feet. Puchi. A terrifying long spear pierced through Gauze's body, nailing him to the ground. Gauze's eyes were still wide open as he stared at Qin Wentian. Regret could be seen flickering in his eyes. Why did he have to come here today? Why did he have to be so talkative? Only to see Qin Wentian waving his hands, as a surge of flames gushed forth, engulfing Gauze's body, incinerating his corpse. At the same time, Qin Wentian kept the ownerless puppets. Now, these puppets belonged to him. The various divine inscriptionists stood there, their countenances ashen. The formation of this Empyrean was simply too powerful to be able to conceal the third-ranked divine inscriptions so perfectly. Even Gauze, a peak-tier third-ranked divine inscriptionist, was killed by stepping on it. Fourth-ranked divine inscriptionists. Qin Wentian stared at those who didn't dare to take the risk. He coldly laughed, all of you are already so old, yet you still have some attainments in the Tao of divine inscriptions. What a bunch of trash, how pitiful. Chapter 283. Qin Wentian wasn't polite at all, insulting all the Grandmaster-level characters in front of him, as though he wanted to incite their anger. Who were these people? Usually, no matter where they went, they would always be treated as esteemed guests. Today, they were being pointed at by a young man, how could they not be embarrassed? However, they didn't reply, nor did any of them act out in anger. Earlier, they forced Gauze to step forward because they wanted him to probe Qin Wentian's strength. They didn't feel the slightest bit of pity for Gauze's death. At the very least, they knew that this illusory formation was extremely mysterious. Beneath it, there were many fatal divine inscriptions. Although they were only third-ranked divine inscriptions, as long as they were hidden there, they wouldn't be able to sense them. No matter how high their attainments in the Tao of divine inscriptions were, stepping into the formation would be extremely dangerous. Which of these people weren't old fellows who had lived for more than half a century? Facing such a situation, they would naturally be extremely cautious. It didn't matter if others died, but their own lives were extremely precious. Even if Qin Wentian wanted to infuriate them, it wouldn't work. Young man, what a heavy baleful aura. Eccentric Song stroked his beard as he coldly continued, however, even if you have the ancient scroll of the Ascendant, do you think you have the qualifications to be so arrogant in front of us? Earlier, we already gave you a chance, but who would have thought that you would be so obstinate? A fourth-ranked Grandmaster would personally inscribe divine inscriptions to kill you. How can you withstand that? As Eccentric Song spoke, he glanced at the others, causing smiles to appear on their faces. Old Ginger was spicier than young Ginger. Why would they bother to break Qin Wentian's formation? They could directly inscribe divine inscriptions to kill Qin Wentian. It would be as easy as flipping their palms. How thick-skinned. Bai Lu couldn't help but laugh when she saw that a group of fourth-ranked Grandmasters didn't even dare to break the formation. What made her even more speechless was that they didn't dare to break the formation, and instead wanted to inscribe divine inscriptions to kill Qin Wentian. Such an action was simply a humiliation, yet these old fellows didn't seem to have the slightest bit of self-awareness. With regards to Bai Lu voice, these people chose to ignore it. Old Liang, this brat killed your protector. Inscribe a divine inscription to kill him. Old Liang, you should be the one to do it. The black-faced middle-aged man turned his gaze onto Old Liang, causing Old Liang to frown. After which, the black-faced middle-aged man continued, I'll get the puppets to protect you. This dark-faced middle-aged man had refined quite a few peak third-tier puppets. He wanted to refine fourth-tier puppets, and the Empyrean's ancient scroll was his chance. I will carve an array to protect you. Elder Song nodded at Elder Liang. Elder Liang pondered for a moment before nodding. At this moment, Qin Wentian also understood. There were many people here today, but other than Fenrir, there were only 3 fourth-ranked Grandmasters in front of him. Not only that, there was also a Heavenly Dipper sovereign who hadn't spoken since the start. Who knew if he was a fourth-ranked Grandmaster or not? He and Wind Valley were the most powerful people here. Elder Song and the others were probably quite afraid of him and had not allowed him to do anything. As for the others, they should be their disciples or protectors. Qin Wentian wondered if there were any fourth-ranked Grandmasters among them. Old Liang warily took a step forward, his sunken eyes staring at Qin Wentian. He no longer dared to treat Qin Wentian as an ordinary third-ranked Grandmaster. Seeing the actions of these people, Qin Wentian laughed. Qin, shall wait for you all to break the array. After speaking, he sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes, as though everything that happened in the outside world had nothing to do with him. This brat is extremely crafty, old Liang, don't fall for his tricks. The black-faced middle-aged man summoned his puppet to protect old Liang. Old Liang took a few steps forward, releasing his perception to the maximum. With a stomp of his foot, numerous runic inscriptions manifested on the ground. This fourth-ranked grandmaster was starting to inscribe divine inscriptions. Although old Liang was inscribing the divine inscriptions, he didn't dare to move forward. Instead, he maintained a certain distance from Qin Wentian. Not long after, the divine inscriptions old Liang was inscribing exuded a powerful might. As an experienced fourth-ranked grandmaster, he only needed 2 hours to inscribe a complete fourth-ranked attack-type divine inscription. The moment the divine inscription was completed, it would be the time of Qin Wentian's death. An hour passed, yet Qin Wentian's eyes were still closed in meditation. Old Liang inclined his head and glanced at him as a sinister light flickered in his eyes. This brat was just sitting there, waiting for his death. After that, he lowered his head and continued inscribing the divine inscription. The might contained within the divine inscription grew stronger and stronger. How slow! Qin Wentian murmured. After which, he slammed his palms onto the ground, and instantly, his entire body transformed into a blur as he dashed forward. With a thunderous boom, 2 Jiao dragons appeared in front of him, howling with rage. Old Liang's countenance stiffened, only to see the black-faced middle-aged man coldly snorting as his puppet rushed forward, preparing to block the Jiao dragons. Boom! Qin Wentian took another step forward, as numerous terrifying arrows pierced through the air, directly locking onto old Liang. Old Liang stepped out as a shield of divine inscriptions appeared in front of him. After which, he saw that Qin Wentian was actually standing in the maw of a demonic dragon. The demonic dragon roared forward, while the Jiao dragons on the left and right acted as his protectors, forcing the black-faced middle-aged man's puppet into retreat. The terrifying claws of the demonic dragon lashed out, forcing old Liang to retreat. With a loud cracking sound, the shield of light shattered, and Qin Wentian slammed his palms onto the ground. Impudent! The black-faced middle-aged man roared, as a long spear of darkness appeared in his hands. His silhouette flickered as he dashed forward, the spear abruptly pierced out. Instantly, the black dragon within the spear howled in rage, exuding a terrifying might. It was as though he had been waiting for this attack. Blasting out a peak-tier third-ranked attack, this spear of darkness should be close to a fourth-ranked divine weapon. Qin Wentian abruptly turned and walked back, while the demonic dragon continued forward, colliding head-on with the black-faced middle-aged man's attack, causing a terrifying sound of destruction to echo out. The light of the demonic dragon was destroyed, yet Qin Wentian had already returned to his original location. Old Liang's countenance was incomparably ashen, the divine inscriptions he painstakingly inscribed were completely destroyed by Qin Wentian's earlier attack. It was as though Qin Wentian had long since thought of how to destroy his incomplete divine inscriptions. With a single strike, all his hard work had gone up in smoke. Everyone, there's no need to hide anymore. Let's use our own methods to kill this brat. The black-faced middle-aged man wielded the long spear in his hands as he coldly spoke. After which, he slashed out with his spear once more, causing the terrifying black dragon to howl madly as it gushed forth. However, in front of Qin Wentian, numerous ancient shields of divine inscriptions appeared. Thunderous rumbling sounds rang out, but the attacks of the black-faced middle-aged man had no way to break through the defense of the divine inscriptions he had inscribed. Qin Wentian used a total of 3 days to inscribe the divine inscriptions as well as the formations here. Ever since Bailu Tong obstructed his path back then, he already knew that there would be a commotion. And now, with so many divine inscriptionists here, the preparations he made during these few days could finally be put to good use. Old Liang's sunken eyes narrowed when he heard the words of the black-faced middle-aged man. He had long known that these fellows all had their own methods. But now, they finally couldn't endure it any longer. Eccentric Song stroked his beard as his aged eyes gleamed with sharpness. Only the Heavenly Dipper sovereigns remained silent, calmly spectating everything. It was as though the matters here had nothing to do with him. What do you plan to do? Eccentric Song stared at the old man with trepidation in his eyes. This old man was the same as Fenrir. Not only was he a fourth-ranked grandmaster, he was also a Heavenly Dipper sovereign. Let's do it based on our own capabilities. That old man casually replied, yet his tone was filled with incomparable arrogance. Fine, since you put it this way, let's do it based on our own capabilities. As the sound of Eccentric Song's voice faded, 3 puppets appeared in front of him. One of the puppets was fully equipped, its body was as though it was forged from a divine weapon. Both its limbs were covered in terrifying blades. This scene caused the pupils of old Liang's eyes to narrow. This old man definitely had many treasures on him. As a highly respected fourth-ranked grandmaster, he had accumulated quite a bit of wealth over the years. Just that fourth-ranked puppet alone was already extremely valuable. The black-faced middle-aged man smiled. His palms streaked across the air, and the black spear in his hand seemed to have lost a layer of light. Strands of black mist surged, and a terrifying eerie aura filled the air. That sharp aura was extremely terrifying. This was a rank 4 divine weapon. Previously, he had concealed the grade of the divine weapon. In their eyes, Qin Wentian was just a jumping clown who would die sooner or later. But what they were more concerned about was how Qin Wentian would obtain the Ascendant's ancient scroll after his death. Hence, all of them held back and didn't really want to risk their lives. But what made them surprised was that ordinary methods wouldn't be able to kill Qin Wentian. Instead, they would be in danger. Since this was the case, they might as well use the most direct and tyrannical method to settle this. Old Liang cursed in a low voice. It seemed like his wealth was truly too low. Is this the confidence of a fourth-ranked grandmaster? Qin Wentian's eyes gleamed with a terrifying sharpness. Finally, his plan was revealed. Bai Lu Yi's heart skipped a beat, only to see Bai Lu Yu, who was beside her, indifferently interjected, "Little Yi, do you really think he has a chance? These people are all fourth-ranked grandmasters, don't underestimate them." Wait. Bai Lu Yi stared at the young man. Seeing that Qin Wentian was still as calm as ever, her voice was filled with stubbornness. Old Liang waved his hands as an umbrella appeared in his hands. With a flick of his palms, the umbrella opened up as a terrifying golden light flowed around it. He walked towards Qin Wentian, his eyes cold to the extreme. Chi, Chi. The long spear of darkness in the hands of the black-faced middle-aged man swept across the ground. Instantly, a terrifying black fissure appeared in front of him, and everywhere it passed, the earth would shatter. His gaze was incomparably cold. What kind of third-ranked divine inscription could withstand such power? Even if it was concealed, it would still be destroyed. Old Liang's umbrella radiated a terrifying golden light as it spun forward, shattering the earth into dust. As for Eccentric Song, he followed behind the puppet. The powerful puppet's legs slashed apart the earth, opening up a path for them. They advanced step by step until they were not far away from Qin Wentian. When they looked at Qin Wentian again, it was as though they were looking at a dead man. "How do you want to die, young man?" Eccentric Song coldly spoke, only to see Qin Wentian standing up. A cold smile could be seen in his eyes as he replied, "Are you guys so confident? No matter how well you inscribe the divine inscriptions, or how powerful your attacks are, they will all be useless." "Just like the one behind me," the black-faced middle-aged man coldly stated. "Oh. Then why don't you turn around and take a look?" Qin Wentian coldly spoke. The black-faced middle-aged man coldly laughed as he casually turned his head back. However, in an instant, his gaze froze on a certain spot. The flowing silver lines of light radiated with a dazzling light. The ground that was sliced apart didn't seem to affect the flow of the divine inscriptions at all. That divine inscription was unceasingly lacerated, even if the ground was split apart. What was even more terrifying was that in that location, the terrifying silvery light of destruction only lasted for an extremely short instant. Under his gaze, the silvery light converged into a terrifying spiraling silver tempest that was akin to a hurricane, instantly blotting out the skies. Boom! A thunderous sound rang out as the earth trembled. The silvery tempest instantly engulfed everything. Qin Wentian's body was abruptly blasted into the void, transforming into a world of silver. The black-robed middle-aged man, eccentric Song and old Liang all stood there in a daze. Their bodies trembled as they inclined their heads, staring at the young man in the air. They only saw Qin Wentian lowering his head, staring down at them with an ice-cold countenance. "What about now?" Qin Wentian faintly spoke. His voice was calm and filled with confidence, yet it caused their hearts to pound wildly. This was a fourth-ranked divine inscription. Chapter 284. Fourth-ranked, that storm of sword chi was filled with an incomparably terrifying aura of destruction. This was clearly the aura of a fourth-ranked divine inscriptionist. Not only that, it was an extremely tyrannical storm of fourth-ranked divine inscriptions. Qin Wentian wasn't a third-ranked divine inscriptionist, he was a fourth-ranked divine inscriptionist. A fourth-ranked divine inscriptionist who wasn't even 20 years of age. The hearts of the spectators pounded wildly as they trembled violently. No wonder this brat was so arrogant. No wonder Qin Wentian dared to humiliate them as a bunch of useless juniors. All of them were at least 50 years old, yet they were only at the initial level of fourth-ranked divine inscriptionists. Compared to Qin Wentian, there was no way they could be compared. One could even say that there was no way to compare them. A 20-year-old fourth-ranked divine inscriptionist compared to a 50-year-old fourth-ranked divine inscriptionist. How could they even compare? Even if Qin Wentian had started studying divine inscriptions at the age of 10, it wouldn't have been more than 10 years since he started studying divine inscriptions. As for them, they had at least 40 years of experience. The disparity was too great. However, at the same time as their hearts trembled, this made them even more frenzied. It had to be the ancient scroll of the Ascendant. Even though they had seen Qin Wentian's attainments in the Tao of Divine Inscriptions, they still believed that Qin Wentian must have obtained the ancient scroll. Only by relying on the terrifying inheritance of a fifth-ranked divine inscriptionist, did he manage to break through to the fourth-ranked. This caused the passion in their hearts to grow even more intense. They had to obtain the ancient scroll of the Ascendant no matter what. This madness caused them to forget the danger they were in. For the ancient scroll of the Ascendant, even if they had to risk their lives, it was worth it. They had to kill this brat and seize the ancient scroll from him. At the side, the large-eyed elder also felt his heart pounding. He glanced at Bailu Yi beside him. "You knew long ago, right? You came here just to let me witness this scene, didn't you? Grandpa, how is it?" Qin Wentian isn't even 19 yet, Bailu Yi smiled at the large-eyed elder. "Not even 19 yet." The large-eyed elder drew in a deep breath. Leaving aside Qin Wentian's talent in the Tao of Divine Inscriptions, just based on his monstrous talent in the Tao of Divine Inscriptions, Qin Wentian would definitely become a terrifying character in the future. He definitely had the chance to break through to the fifth-ranked Grandmaster realm. Divine inscriptionists were the same as cultivators. The higher one's cultivation base, the higher their status. How could a celestial phenomenon ascendant compare to a heavenly dipper sovereign? And a fifth-ranked Grandmaster would definitely be able to summon the wind and summon the rain in Grand Xia. It wouldn't be a problem for him to recruit as many heavenly dipper sovereigns as he wished. Not only did Qin Wentian have an extremely high level of attainment in the Tao of Tao, he was also someone with extremely terrifying potential. However, Bailu Tong's thoughts were different. He naturally knew of Qin Wentian's talent and potential, but what he cared more about was the ancient scroll of the Ascendant. "Everyone, let's stop here." The large-eyed elder spoke. At this moment, he already didn't wish for this situation to continue. Qin Wentian and the other Grandmasters were truly enraged. If they fought to the death, there would undoubtedly be casualties. Regardless of whether it was the Grandmasters or Qin Wentian, the large-eyed elder didn't want to see that happen. Qin Wentian stood in the air, the entire space around him transformed into a tempest of swords. This divine inscription was indeed a fourth-ranked divine inscription from the ancient scroll of divine inscriptions. It was named the Sword Cyclone Tempest, and could be divided into many smaller versions. It was considered a type of divine inscription with an extremely high attack power. In order to inscribe this divine inscription, he had spent a great deal of time and effort before he succeeded. At this moment, he was the ruler of this tempest. Below, in the midst of the tempest, the three fourth-ranked grandmasters had expressions of extreme caution on their faces as they stared at Qin Wentian. "Elder, how can it be possible for us to stop now?" The black-faced middle-aged man coldly spoke. After which, he and old Liang walked over to eccentric Song's side. "Eccentric Song, although this brat has inscribed a fourth-ranked divine inscription, your puppet is also a fourth-ranked one. We will protect you while you use your puppet to kill this brat. Once he dies, the divine inscription will have no owner, and the attack will dissipate. How about the three of us cultivate the ancient scroll of the Ascendant together?" Eccentric Song lightly nodded her head. The two peak-tier third-ranked puppets were already on her left and right, while the fourth-ranked puppet stood in front. The body of the puppet that was forged from a divine weapon exuded an aura of coldness. "Elder, you've also heard it. I, Qin, have been in a passive position from the start to the end. This brat wants my life." Qin Wentian spoke to the large-eyed elder, his words causing the large-eyed elder's expression to stiffen. He knew that if these fourth-ranked grandmasters didn't kill Qin Wentian, they wouldn't give up. Leaving aside the ancient scroll of the Ascendant, if Qin Wentian was still alive, he would be a huge threat to them as well. After today, there would be many transcendent powers coming to the White Deer Institute to recruit Qin Wentian. For a 19-year-old grandmaster, even if it was a transcendent power, they would be willing to support him unconditionally, allowing him to research divine inscriptions. So no matter from which angle one looked at it from, Qin Wentian had to die. "Grand Elder, you won't be able to persuade him otherwise," Bailu Tong faintly stated. He naturally hoped that the battle would continue. "Eccentric Song, order the puppet to kill this brat. Old Liang, use your divine weapon to protect him." The black-faced middle-aged man's voice rang out. He already knew that the umbrella-shaped divine weapon of the high-nosed old Liang could be used for both offense and defense. "Good, this brat is too arrogant. Destroy him." Eccentric Song stroked his white beard as he spoke with confidence. After which, his fourth-ranked puppet soared up into the skies, the sabers on its body lacerating the space around it. Even the sword chi was directly sliced apart. Below, the black-faced middle-aged man stabbed his spear into the ground. Instantly, the ground crumbled apart, transforming into a vacuum. At the same time, old Liang's umbrella opened up, floating above the heads of the three of them as a screen of light enveloped them within. With their bodies enveloped by fourth-ranked divine inscriptions, they didn't dare to rush out recklessly. Hence, they used their divine weapons to protect themselves, while relying on the fourth-ranked puppet to kill the Lord of Divine Inscriptions, Qin Wentian. "Die!" Qin Wentian flicked his finger in the air, and instantly, a terrifying sword tempest gushed towards the umbrella-shaped divine weapon. In an instant, the golden light from the tempest sword flashed, and at the same time, the fourth-ranked puppet soared up into the skies. With a terrifying sharpness, it slashed out with its palms as a terrifying beam of cold light shot towards Qin Wentian. "Humph," Qin Wentian snorted as he continued, "This fourth-ranked puppet, I'll gladly accept it." As the sound of his voice faded, a terrifying sword tempest gushed forth, colliding with the fourth-ranked puppet in a frenzy. At the same time, Qin Wentian waved his palms as a gigantic golden-armored puppet appeared in front of him. "Go!" Qin Wentian coldly stated. Momentarily, the golden-armored puppet dashed towards the bladed puppet, while Qin Wentian's silhouette floated in the air, once again staring at the three divine inscriptionists hiding within their divine weapons. "Puppet, he also has a fourth-ranked puppet on him." The countenances of Eccentric Song and the other two turned ashen. The golden-armored puppet and the blade-wielding puppet were locked in combat, and there was also the terrifying sword tempest from the side. They had no way to affect Qin Wentian in the slightest. With a wave of his hands, tens of thousands of sword lights whistled through the air, coalescing into a terrifying gigantic sword that exuded boundless sharpness. After which, Qin Wentian pointed his finger downwards, and instantly, the gigantic sword slashed down from the heavens. With a thunderous boom, the gigantic sword slammed into the protective screen of light, causing the bodies of eccentric Song and the other two to tremble violently. What should we do? What should we do? Eccentric Song was in a state of panic. This young man who wasn't even 19 years of age had completely exceeded their expectations. Damn it. Old Liang's countenance turned ashen as he stared at the black-faced middle-aged man. This divine weapon of mine has both offense and defense, but in terms of offense and defense, it can't be compared to a pure fourth-rank divine weapon. The fourth-rank divine inscription of the opponent is a sword-type divine inscription, it's only a matter of time before it breaks through the defense of the divine weapon. Since you have an attack-type divine weapon, kill your way out. Kill my way out? The expression of the black-faced middle-aged man stiffened. Although he had an attack-type fourth-rank divine weapon, his cultivation base wasn't at the Heavenly Dipper realm. He was only at the Yuanfu realm. So what if he had a fourth-rank divine weapon? Initially, they thought that even if Qin Wentian had set up a fourth-rank divine inscription, with their fourth-ranked puppets, as well as their attack-type and defensive-type divine weapons, victory was still within their grasp. However, Qin Wentian had also taken out a fourth-ranked puppet, instantly overturning the situation. Boom! Yet another terrifying shockwave rang out as the gigantic sword slashed downwards in a frenzy. Cracks had already appeared on the umbrella-shaped protective screen of light. If this continues on, it will break sooner or later. Old Liang's countenance turned pale. With them in the center, a storm of swords swept over. As long as the protective screen of light shattered, they would all die without a burial ground. Peng Hai, help out! Eccentric Song turned his gaze towards the Heavenly Dipper sovereign inscriptionist who had yet to act. Peng Hai was someone they were extremely fearful of. Even after killing Qin Wentian and obtaining the ancient scroll of the Ascendant, he, the black-faced middle-aged man and old Liang were still prepared to join forces to deal with Peng Hai. But now, they had no choice but to seek help from Peng Hai. However, Peng Hai was still as calm as ever. A long spear appeared in his hands, imbued with a fearsome fiery rune. However, he didn't move, he merely stood there quietly. His eyes were so swollen that it was as though flames were burning within them as he stared at the divine inscription in front of him. Now that the fourth-ranked Sword Tempest divine inscription had completely erupted, this was the best time to see the divine inscription clearly. A crisp sound rang out as the protective screen of the fourth-ranked divine weapon shattered. Cracks also appeared on the umbrella-shaped protective screen. In that instant, Eccentric Song, Old Liang and the black-faced middle-aged man lifted their heads in shock, staring at the young man in the air. Terror could be seen on their faces. Qin Wentian's eyes flashed, and in an instant, the few of them could feel the intense killing intent radiating from Qin Wentian. Get back here! Eccentric Song commanded the puppet to return, but how could Qin Wentian not know what he was thinking? The golden-armored puppet and the Tempest divine inscription flew over, entangling Qin Wentian's puppet. Bzzz, the silhouette of the black-faced middle-aged man flickered as he dashed out. The long spear of darkness in his hands opened up a path, while the black dragon roared as it dashed out, opening up a path for Qin Wentian. However, as the sound of swords whistled through the air, a gigantic sword was embedded into the ground in front of him. The black-faced middle-aged man inclined his head, only to see countless beams of sword light pointing towards him. As long as Qin Wentian waved his hands, he would die without a burial. Little brother Qin, please hold back for now. At this moment, the large-eyed elder's tone of address towards Qin Wentian was much more polite. A 19-year-old fourth-ranked grandmaster, he naturally had to treat Qin Wentian with respect. The three of them all have some status. This man is a guest elder from the Han clan of the Moon Continent. The Han clan's influence in the Moon Continent isn't weak at all. The large-eyed elder reminded Qin Wentian. That's right, if you kill me, the Han clan will definitely not spare you. The black-faced middle-aged man glared at Qin Wentian. How impressive were you earlier, yet now you're using your background. How pitiful. If the Han clan wants to avenge you, I will immediately join a transcendent power. Do you think the Han clan would dare to touch me? Qin Wentian's gaze swept over to the black-faced middle-aged man, causing his countenance to turn even darker. A 19-year-old fourth-ranked grandmaster. As long as news of this spread out, how could a mere Han clan be able to contend against the powers that wanted to recruit Qin Wentian? There are so many treasures here, it's a waste to leave them on the three of you. Why don't you leave them for me? As the sound of Qin Wentian's voice faded, sword chi swept out as a gigantic sword slashed downwards. The black-faced middle-aged man blocked with his spear, colliding head-on with the gigantic sword. Abruptly, a resplendent beam of sword light whizzed past his neck, causing him to feel a chill as a line of blood appeared on his neck. Eccentric Song and eccentric Liang were both terrified when they saw this scene. Their countenances were as white as a sheet of paper. Qin Wentian had slain the black-faced middle-aged man. A fourth-ranked grandmaster had fallen. Chapter 285. Not long ago, they told Qin Wentian that the Ascendant's ancient scroll was in Qin Wentian's possession. It was a waste of a heavenly treasure. If he didn't hand it over, he would be killed. Right now, Qin Wentian had returned their words to them. The sword chi continued whistling through the air as the black-faced middle-aged man's body was destroyed by that terrifying sword tempest. Qin Wentian waved his hands and an instant later, a divine interspatial ring as well as a long black spear appeared in his hands. He then kept them away. The wealth of a fourth-ranked grandmaster must have been quite bountiful this time around. A cold light flashed past. Qin Wentian glanced at eccentric Song and eccentric Liang, only to see that their countenances were as pale as paper. Eccentric Song squeezed out a smile as he looked at Qin Wentian. Brother Qin's talent is truly shocking. Such a young grandmaster, it's sufficient for your name to shake the entire moon continent. This old man was foolish. If I had offended you in any way, please forgive me. I'm willing to gift a fourth-ranked puppet to Brother Qin as an apology. After which, eccentric Song bowed slightly to Qin Wentian, showing his sincerity. However, Qin Wentian was still coldly staring at him. His gaze was as sharp as the edge of a blade, and the terrifying sword intent he exuded caused the terror in eccentric Song's heart to intensify. This old man and Brother Qin don't have a life and death grudge, why must we fight to the death? Eccentric Song knew that revealing his background wouldn't be enough to intimidate Qin Wentian. Hence, he could only use the promise of benefits as he continued, as long as Brother Qin forgoes this matter, I will definitely not mistreat Brother Qin. Just moments ago, eccentric Song had just threatened to kill Qin Wentian. Yet now, he was saying that he didn't have a life and death grudge with Qin Wentian? How laughable. And yet, eccentric Song didn't seem to feel the slightest bit of shame when he spoke. In front of Qin Wentian, the sword tempest manifested, transforming into a terrifying gigantic sword. Qin Wentian stretched out his hand and pointed a finger at eccentric Song. Instantly, a terrifying sword beam slashed through the air, causing eccentric Song's countenance to turn deathly pale. As the sword light swept past, eccentric Song's body was directly split into two. The body of the high-nosed old man Liang trembled violently as he grabbed the umbrella-shaped divine weapon and hurriedly fled from the divine inscription. Qin Wentian did not intend to forgive them at all. This guy wanted to kill them. How could he escape? The sword light slashed down, and his body came to a stop. A bloody light appeared between his brows. Qin Wentian's silhouette descended as he started to collect his spoils of war. 3 fourth-ranked grandmasters, the spoils of war this time around were many times more than his entire fortune. However, just as Qin Wentian was collecting his spoils of war, the earth abruptly trembled. Qin Wentian's eyes turned incomparably sharp. Turning his eyes over, he saw that Peng Hai, who had been observing the divine inscriptions all this while, had finally made his move. Peng Hai's attack was earth-shattering, and wherever his long spear passed by, a piercing sound rang out, causing Qin Wentian's countenance to freeze. A fourth-ranked grandmaster at the Heavenly Dipper realm was indeed far superior to a Yuanfu grandmaster. Wu Xiu's strength was too important. At this moment, Peng Hai acted, ignoring the attacks of the divine inscriptions. Astral nova appeared in his body as an incomparably resplendent long spear appeared, frenziedly sweeping through the divine inscriptions. Terrifying rumbling sounds rang out as the divine inscriptions were shattered, and the sword qi grew weaker and weaker. After waiting for such a long time, he had already thought of a way to neutralize the divine inscriptions. He was just waiting for this moment to strike. Heavenly Dipper sovereigns weren't comparable to Yuanfu grandmasters with fourth-ranked divine weapons. Their astral novas were as fearsome as fourth-ranked divine weapons, capable of breaking through anything. Qin Wentian's silhouette flickered as the golden-armored puppet whizzed over, standing in front of him. At the same time, he kept the other puppet away. Boom! Another explosive sound rang out as the divine inscriptions were destroyed. Peng Hai's palms trembled as the astral nova spear pierced through the air. Instantly, Qin Wentian felt as though his body was about to be pierced through. This was the power of a mandate. How terrifying was the mandate of a Heavenly Dipper sovereign. Go! Qin Wentian's silhouette flickered as he retreated, only to see the golden-armored puppet pouncing over, clashing against the astral nova. The astral nova seemed to have a life of its own, sweeping out in a frenzy, each strike containing an earth-shattering might. The golden-armored puppet grabbed out with its palms, clashing against the astral nova, causing the earth to tremble. Peng Hai's eyes swept over to Qin Wentian, the sharpness of his gaze seemingly capable of penetrating through Qin Wentian. His silhouette flickered with the speed of lightning. A 19-year-old fourth-ranked grandmaster indeed had shocking potential, and there would be countless major powers inviting him to join them. However, once he died, there would be nothing left. Now, Peng Hai wanted to kill Qin Wentian, seizing the ancient scroll of the Ascendant. Qin Wentian, you still have a chance. Bai Lu Yu indifferently stated, his words causing Qin Wentian's eyes to narrow. Now, Bai Lu Yu actually wanted to take advantage of him, threatening him to hand over the ancient scroll to his father, Bai Lu Tong. Great-grandpa. Bai Lu Yi stared at the large-eyed elder, as a pleading expression appeared on her face. Great Elder, don't you wish for a fifth-ranked grandmaster to appear in our White Deer Institute in the future? I have to obtain the ancient scroll of the Ascendant no matter what, Bai Lu Tong coldly stated. Bai Lu Tong, who was at the side, coldly stated. The battle here had attracted the attention of many experts from the White Deer Institute. When they arrived, they immediately asked, what's going on? Qin Wentian, a 19-year-old fourth-ranked grandmaster. He's a good friend of mine, yet Elder Bai Lu Tong wants to kill him and seize the ancient scroll of the Ascendant, Bai Lu Yi coldly stated. Bai Lu Yi spoke, causing the eyes of the crowd to freeze. A 19-year-old fourth-ranked grandmaster. What about the other fourth-ranked grandmasters? Someone asked. They were all killed by Qin Wentian using divine inscriptions, Bai Lu Yu coldly replied. Bai Lu Yu coldly replied. Because of Qin Wentian, he and Bai Lu Yi were now on opposite sides. Father. Bai Lu Yi turned her gaze to her father. Bai Lu Shan's countenance flashed with a strange light as he stared ahead. Qin Wentian was still using third-ranked divine inscriptions to defend, yet they were all being destroyed by his opponent. Grandmaster Peng Hai, that's enough. Bai Lu Shan spoke. After which, he stepped out, whistling through the air. Brother Shan, what are you doing? Bai Lu Yu's silhouette flickered as he appeared in front of Bai Lu Shan. Bai Lu Yi's countenance turned pale. She stared at the large-eyed elder, only to hear the latter calmly replying, don't be anxious. How could he not be anxious? Peng Hai wanted to end the battle as soon as possible. He used his astral nova to delay the puppet while he brandished his long spear, dashing towards Qin Wentian. With a flick of his hand, the long spear transformed into a beam of cold light that shot towards Qin Wentian. Bzzz, a raging wind gusted by as a shrill screech rang out. After which, a resplendent lotus flower appeared in front of Qin Wentian, swirling around the long spear. In an instant, the long spear was enveloped within. Behind Qin Wentian, a silhouette appeared. This silhouette had a flawless physique, and was clad in white with a veil covering her face. She exuded an otherworldly aura akin to that of a celestial fairy. Her silhouette stood in front of Qin Wentian. A gentle smile flickered in Qin Wentian's eyes as he stared at the silhouette. She always appeared at the most crucial moment, silently protecting him, as though she was omnipresent. I'll get the puppet to help you kill this person. Qin Wentian's eyes flickered with sharpness as he stared at Peng Hai. This person's combat prowess isn't high, I can deal with him. Qin Er's voice was clear and melodious. Although her words were cold, they caused Qin Wentian to feel extremely comfortable when he heard them. Peng Hai's countenance stiffened as his countenance turned extremely unsightly. Those from the White Deer Institute also had looks of bewilderment on their faces. There was actually a Heavenly Dipper sovereign protecting Qin Wentian? Not only that, this Heavenly Dipper sovereign was an extremely beautiful woman, akin to a celestial maiden from a painting. Their gazes involuntarily shifted onto Bai Lu, only to see that even she had a puzzled expression on her face. Qin Wentian had said that he and Mo Qingcheng were lovers. In that case, who was this celestial maiden in front of them? He remembered that she had appeared once before. Peng Hai's countenance was extremely unsightly to behold. He glanced at Qin before shifting his gaze onto the experts from the White Deer Institute. He knew that the matter today was already destined to fail. Farewell. His long spear astral nova whistled in rage as his silhouette flickered as he departed. Qin still stood there quietly and didn't give chase. Qin Wentian cast a glance at Qin as he smiled. He didn't say anything, nor did he ask any questions. However, Qin Er's beautiful eyes flickered, as though she could read Qin Wentian's thoughts. After which, her lips trembled as her voice transformed into strands of silk, drifting into Qin Wentian's ears. He won't be able to escape. The people from the Celestial Lake Palace are right outside. Today, no one will dare to touch you. Qin Er's voice directly entered Qin Wentian's ears, causing Qin Wentian to freeze. The people from the Celestial Lake Palace had arrived. This caused an expression of bewilderment to appear on Qin Wentian's face. Why would the people from the Celestial Lake Palace appear at this time? Sweeping his gaze across the crowd from the White Deer Institute, he saw Di Cheng, as well as a young man with an extraordinary demeanor. At this moment, Qin Wentian finally understood. So it turned out that Fairy Qingmei had always been paying attention to him. As the lover of the Azure Emperor, Fairy Qingmei should know many secrets that others didn't. Everything that happened in the White Deer Institute, including the arrival of Di Feng, as well as the difficulties he was facing, were all known to her. At this moment, Qin Wentian understood that the relationship between Fairy Qingmei and the Azure Emperor wasn't as rumored. On the contrary, no one cared more about the Azure Emperor than she did. Even if he was the successor of the Azure Emperor, because he had obtained the Azure Emperor token, Fairy Qingmei would support him unconditionally, only acknowledging him as the successor. They came at the right time. A smile appeared in Qin Wentian's eyes. Earlier, he had displayed his talent as a fourth-ranked Grandmaster, in addition to Fairy Qingmei's support. In this case, no matter who stood behind Di Feng, he wouldn't be at a disadvantage. I bid my farewell as well. Grandmaster Fenrir knew that this wasn't the time for him to stay. Clasping his hands to the crowd, he departed the area. As for those who came with the fourth-ranked Grandmasters, they had long since fled with their tails between their legs. It was as though they were afraid that if they were a step slower, they would be killed by Qin Wentian. Not long after, other than those from the White Deer Institute, only Qin Wentian and Qing remained. Fourth-ranked Grandmaster. Bai Lu suddenly laughed coldly, as he stared at the crowd from the White Deer Institute. Everyone, this young man came to our White Deer Institute to study divine inscriptions. In fact, he already has an extremely high level of attainment in the Tao of Divine Inscriptions. Not only that, he even has a Heavenly Dipper sovereign following him. I'm afraid that he has some ulterior motives. My heart won't die. Qin Wentian silently mused as he glanced at Bai Lu Yu. Chapter 286. Qin Wentian laughed. I came to the White Deer Institute to study divine inscriptions and became friends with Little E. I've never done anything to offend the White Deer Institute, yet you're accusing me of something I don't deserve. How laughable. If you're greedy for my treasures, just say it. There's no need to be so hypocritical. Bai Lu Yu narrowed his eyes. If he allowed Qin Wentian to leave the White Deer Institute today, he would never be able to obtain the ancient scroll ever again. Seeing that more and more experts from the White Deer Institute had gathered here, Bai Lu Tong finally spoke. Everyone, let's discuss how we should handle this matter. I, Bai Lu Tong, have immersed myself in the Tao of Divine Inscriptions for many years, and my attainments in it aren't weak. If I can obtain the ancient scroll, I might have a chance to break through to the 5th ranked. The value of a 5th ranked divine inscriptionist, I'm sure all of you can understand. Qin Wentian isn't even 19 yet he's already a 4th ranked divine inscriptionist. Not only that, he's a good friend of mine. Why must the White Deer Institute do such a despicable thing? Compared to you, Elder Bai Lu Tong, he has a higher chance of breaking through to the 5th ranked, Bai Lu Yi retorted. Impudent, Little E, although the elders of the White Deer Institute regard you highly, you have no right to talk back to them like this, Bai Lu Yu berated. Not only that, even if he has a higher chance, he's still an outsider. There are some words that I have no choice but to say. Bai Lu Yi knew that Qin Wentian was the holder of the Azure Emperor token. She didn't know what would happen if the elders of the White Deer Institute treated him like this. Uncle Yu, bring them away and guard the back mountain. Don't let anyone near, Bai Lu Yi commanded to an old man who was extremely loyal to the White Deer Institute. Uncle Yu understood Bai Lu Yi's meaning, and with a wave of his hands, he brought those who weren't core members away. Do the two of you want to leave? Bai Lu Yi asked Di Feng. Little E, Di Feng is an esteemed guest of our White Deer Institute. There's no need to hide this, Bai Lu Tong replied. I, Di Feng, guarantee that Miss Yi's words will never be leaked. Di Feng smiled. Bai Lu Yi stared at him, before turning her gaze onto those from the White Deer Institute. She coldly laughed. There are some words I have to say today. Elder Tong, you should ask yourself, in terms of attainment in the Tao of Divine Inscriptions, whose talent is higher? Bai Lu Tong stared at Bai Lu Yi. He didn't reply, only to hear an elder interjecting, although Elder Tong's attainments are high, his talent might not be higher than Little Yi's. In that case, if the White Deer Institute possesses the inheritance of the Ascendant, who do you all think would have the highest chance of becoming a 5th ranked divine inscriptionist? Bai Lu Yi asked again, her words causing expressions of bewilderment to appear on the faces of the crowd. Bai Lu Shan's eyes brightened. From Bai Lu Yi's words, it seemed that she had a chance to obtain the Ascendant's inheritance. That's right, his daughter had a close relationship with Qin Wentian. Share it, Bai Lu Tong coldly stated. What a joke. Even if Qin Wentian obtained the Ascendant's inheritance, it belongs to him. You want to share it? Bai Lu Yi coldly laughed. Today, I'll tell all the elders that Qin Wentian has indeed obtained the ancient scroll of the Ascendant, and in the future, he will definitely become a 5th ranked divine inscriptionist. Other than this, Qin Wentian has already given the ancient scroll to me. The countenances of the crowd froze. Qin Wentian had given the ancient scroll to Bai Lu Yi? It seemed like the two of them were really lovers. Not only that, Qin Wentian treated Bai Lu Yi so well. A smile broke out on Bai Lu Shan's face. If this was the case, there was no need to doubt his choice. He would unconditionally stand on Qin Wentian's side. Bai Lu Yi's grandfather, one of the 9 elders of the White Deer Institute, also stroked his beard and laughed. The more he looked at Qin Wentian, the more he liked him. a 19-year-old fourth-ranked grandmaster. He was naturally more inclined to befriend Qin Wentian. It was only because the ancient scroll of the Ascendant was too valuable that Bai Lu Tong's heart was filled with greed. This was why he wanted to kill Qin Wentian and seize the ancient scroll. If not, such a thing wouldn't have happened, and they would still protect Qin Wentian. Elders, please consider this carefully. If Elder Bai Lu Tong acted against Qin Wentian, Bai Lu Yi wouldn't have the face to remain in the White Deer Institute. The White Deer Institute would lose 2 fifth-ranked grandmasters, Bai Lu Yi stated. Momentarily, Bai Lu Tong's countenance turned exceptionally unsightly to behold. For the sake of the ancient scroll, even if Bai Lu Yi was a member of the White Deer Institute, he could still disown her. Little Yi, are you threatening the White Deer Institute? Bai Lu Tong coldly retorted. Not only that, as a junior, since you obtained the ancient scroll, why didn't you hand it over to your elders? Is this something a junior should do? Today, I've finally seen through Elder Tong. Coveting the ancient scroll of others, yet still acting so righteously. Why should I hand it over to you? Bai Lu Yi mocked. After which, she turned her gaze onto the others. Elders, please decide. Elder Tong, you've gone too far. Bai Lu Yi's grandfather was naturally on his granddaughter's side. There's no need to argue any further, it's simply too embarrassing. The large-eyed elder couldn't help but berate when he saw this scene. After which, he turned to Qin Wentian, little brother Qin, as a guest of Little Yi, the White Deer Institute has offended us today. Please don't take offense. When those grandmasters came to demand the ancient scroll of the Ascendant, not only did our White Deer Institute not stop them, you even took the side of the evildoers. As the great elder, I didn't intervene in time. This is my mistake. The great elder personally admitted his mistake, causing the others to shut their mouths. They instantly understood what was going on today. As a grandmaster, Bai Lu Tong coveted the ancient scroll of the Ascendant in Qin Wentian's hands. But because of Bai Lu Yi, he didn't directly deal with Qin Wentian. Instead, he wanted to use the other grandmasters to pressure Qin Wentian so that Qin Wentian would obediently hand over the ancient scroll of the Ascendant in exchange for the protection of the White Deer Institute. Those fourth-ranked grandmasters could naturally see through Bai Lu Tong's intentions. But the temptation of the ancient scroll of the Ascendant was simply too great. Hence, they couldn't bear to give it up. However, nobody could have imagined the ending. Qin Wentian continued to use his trump cards. Fourth-ranked divine inscriptions, fourth-ranked puppets, and even heavenly dipper sovereigns. With the deaths of those fourth-ranked grandmasters, Bai Lu Tong's plans were all for naught. Hence, he decided to use the White Deer Institute to pressure Qin Wentian, forcing him to hand over the ancient scroll of the Ascendant. However, he had already offended Bai Lu Yi, who was on good terms with Qin Wentian. Hence, the current situation arose. Bai Lu Tong was still unwilling to give up, but the large-eyed elder and the others didn't agree. Qin Wentian could see the sincerity in the large-eyed elder's words, and he knew that this elder had a good impression of him. Hence, he smiled. This matter was done by Bai Lu Tong alone, it has nothing to do with the White Deer Institute. I, Qin, am naturally clear about this. Since the large-eyed elder took the initiative to form a good relationship with him, he naturally wouldn't fall out with the power he wanted to control. Good, good, it's rare for you to be so magnanimous. The large-eyed elder smiled and nodded. In truth, he hadn't acted before because he wanted to see if Qin Wentian could handle the situation himself. If Bai Lu Tong really wanted to kill Qin Wentian, he would still act to stop him. Grand Elder, this matter isn't something you can decide alone. I will report this to the elders and let them decide. At this moment, the previously silent Bai Lu Tong spoke again, his words causing the countenances of the crowd to sink as they bitterly smiled in their hearts. The situation was getting more and more strained, causing the internal factions of the White Deer Institute to split. Such a situation was something nobody wanted to see. Regardless of the Grand Elder's side or Bai Lu Tong's side, they all represented a portion of the White Deer Institute's power. The reason why Bai Lu Tong had such confidence was because his father was one of the 4 elders, and was in charge of the Institute's divine inscriptionists. His status was extremely important, and he was extremely protective of his own people. The large-eyed elder's countenance turned extremely unsightly when he heard Bai Lu Tong's words. How embarrassing! Because of greed, the internal factions of the White Deer Institute were divided. This was something he had never expected, and didn't want to see. Since you have the ancient scroll, why don't you take it out and share it with us? From afar, a voice drifted over, causing the hearts of many to involuntarily tremble. The Supreme Elder had spoken. The crowd all had their own thoughts. This Supreme Elder definitely wanted to share the ancient scroll with the most powerful grandmasters of the White Deer Institute. For the sake of the Institute's benefits, he wasn't wrong in doing so. Qin Wentian inclined his head and stared at the horizon. It seemed like there was an elder supporting Bai Lu Tong. Now that he had become a 4th-ranked grandmaster, the attitude of the Supreme Elder was still the same. Evidently, it was because he, Qin Wentian, was an outsider. Luckily, he didn't take out the Azure Emperor token back then. If not, he didn't know what the White Deer Institute's attitude would be like. As an outsider, I also feel that Qin Wentian should share the ancient scroll with us. In return, the White Deer Institute can guarantee his safety, Di Feng spoke, causing a smile to appear on Bai Lu Tong's face. Qin Wentian swept his gaze over to Di Feng as he coldly laughed, how fair. Who are you? Do I need you to interfere in my affairs? I'm someone you can't afford to offend. Di Cheng, who was standing beside Di Feng, coldly replied. Just a 4th-ranked grandmaster, he can easily crush you to death. How arrogant. Descendant of the Azure Emperor, from the Supreme D clan? As the sound of Qin Wentian's voice faded, the crowd couldn't help but be shocked. Their incomparably sharp gazes stared at Qin Wentian. This was the greatest secret of the White Deer Institute, yet Qin Wentian actually knew about it. The gazes of the crowd involuntarily turned to Bai Lu Yi. Even the elders of Bai Lu Yi were blaming her for not knowing the gravity of the situation. Traitorous bastard. Bai Lu Yi mocked. After which, he took a step forward. In that case, you deserve to die even more. This Qin Wentian had really given him a good excuse to act. Qin Wentian was truly courting death. Bai Lu Yi stared at Qin Wentian in astonishment. The voice of the Azure faction sounded out. Was Qin Wentian planning to lay all his cards on the table? Damn it all. Di Cheng coldly laughed. Today, Qin Wentian would die for sure. Everyone should have seen it for yourself. Those from the Supreme D clan also want him dead. Bai Lu Yu stared at the crowd. Upon hearing his words, Qin Wentian laughed. Why do you respect the descendants of the Azure Emperor so much? The White Deer Institute is the descendant of the Azure Emperor. Didn't Bai Lu Yi tell you this? Bai Lu Yu coldly laughed. If the successor of the Azure Emperor wants you to die, would you die? Qin Wentian looked at Bai Lu Yu with a mocking expression. If that's even possible. Bai Lu Yu laughed. Right now, he wanted to use this opportunity to express his support for Di Feng. In that case, Di Feng would stand on his side today. Oh. Qin Wentian smiled as he nodded his head. In that case, you can go and die now. After speaking, Qin Wentian stared at the horizon as he spoke. Qin Wentian requests an audience with the Supreme Elders of the White Deer Institute. His voice rumbled and spread far into the distance. In the void, there were many responses. How arrogant. Do you think the Supreme Elders are people you can meet just because you say so? Bai Lu Yu coldly laughed. You are still not qualified. Di Cheng's hatred for Qin Wentian had been ignited ever since he was humiliated. And now, this fellow was finally going to die. Qin Wentian laughed. After which, he stretched out his palm as he icily stated, how about this? Humph. Expressions of disdain flashed on the faces of the crowd as they turned their gazes onto Qin Wentian's palm. After which, they froze as they stared intently at it. In the next instant, their eyes froze as their hearts pounded violently. The large-eyed elder stared at the gigantic word, his heart pounding. That was the word azure. Di Feng's eyes gleamed with sharpness as his heart pounded. In Qin Wentian's hands was the Azure Emperor token. Qin Wentian swept his gaze over to Bailu Tong, Di Cheng, and the rest as he enunciated each word slowly. I, Qin Wentian, am the true successor of the Azure Emperor. As the sound of his voice faded, the hearts of those in the crowd all trembled violently. The Azure Emperor token, that was the Azure Emperor token. Di Feng was only a descendant of the Supreme Di clan. He, Qin Wentian, was the one who held the Azure Emperor token in his hands. He was the true successor of the Azure Emperor. Chapter 287. The Azure Emperor token. Qin Wentian, he actually had the Azure Emperor token in his hands. This indicated that Qin Wentian was the true successor of the Azure Emperor. Those from the Di clan, as well as the direct descendants of the White Deer Institute, naturally understood the significance of the Azure Emperor token. With the Azure Emperor token, one could command the hidden Azure faction. Everyone should understand my purpose for coming to the White Deer Institute, right? Qin Wentian coldly laughed as he stared at Bailu Yu. Sinister intentions? With the Azure Emperor token in his hands, he could already command the entire White Deer Institute. What sinister intentions? Qin Wentian turned his gaze onto Di Cheng, only to see the coldness in Di Cheng's eyes. How could this be? How could the Azure Emperor token be in the hands of Qin Wentian? So easily squashed me to death. A mere descendant of the Di clan dares to speak to me in such a manner. Even the old ancestor of your Di clan wouldn't dare to say such words in front of me. Insubordination, what punishment do you deserve? Qin Wentian abruptly berated. His gaze swept over, causing Di Cheng to feel an immense pressure bearing down on him, causing his state of mind to waver. Insubordination, what punishment do you deserve? He, Di Cheng, was only a junior of the Di clan, while Qin Wentian had the Azure Emperor token in his possession. His actions could be considered as insubordination. Even if the elders of the Di clan were to meet the owner of the Azure Emperor token, they would still have to respect him and obey his commands. The large-eyed elder drew in a deep breath. Di Feng's performance in coming to the White Deer Institute had led them to believe that Di Feng would be the successor of the Di clan, and that in the future, he would become the leader of the Azure Emperor. However, he had never imagined that the person who took out the Azure Emperor token would be none other than Qin Wentian. Qin Wentian, a 19-year-old fourth-ranked Grandmaster, came to the White Deer Institute because he was the true successor of the Azure Emperor. Before this, Qin Wentian had been enduring silently because he wasn't sure of the attitude of the White Deer Institute. Hence, he didn't take out the Azure Emperor token recklessly. But now, he finally couldn't endure any longer. Because the White Deer Institute and the Supreme Di clan actually wanted to kill him, the successor of the Azure Emperor. It seemed like a drama, but it was actually happening. His gaze involuntarily shifted to Bailu Yi. Bailu Yi was the only one who wasn't shocked. Most probably, Qin Wentian had already told her everything. Because of their special relationship, Bailu Yi would never betray Qin Wentian. Qin Wentian had absolute trust in Xiao Yi. After all, this identity was too sensitive. The large-eyed elder glanced at Di Feng and the rest, feeling a headache coming on. Everything that had happened today had completely exceeded his expectations. Right now, it was no longer just a matter of the Ascendant's ancient scroll, it concerned the future of the White Deer Institute. Would the White Deer Institute listen to the commands of the descendant of the Azure Emperor? If they obeyed, should they obey Qin Wentian who had the Azure Emperor token, or should they obey Di Feng, the successor of the Di clan? All of these were extremely difficult problems. Di Feng was ranked number 5 in the Heavenly Fate rankings. If it was in the past, it would be extremely difficult for Qin Wentian to compete with him. But now, Qin Wentian was a 19-year-old fourth-ranked Grandmaster. Just based on talent alone, both of them were extremely outstanding. Di Feng's advantage was that he had the support of the Di clan. As for Qin Wentian, he was even younger. Nobody knew how far he would go in the future in terms of divine inscriptions and martial Dao. But without a doubt, his potential was extremely terrifying. If not, how could Qin Wentian have obtained the Azure Emperor token? This meant that Qin Wentian had already passed the test left behind by the Azure Emperor. That was why he was chosen to be the successor. Let me verify the authenticity of the Azure Emperor token, Di Qing stated. He had no way to accept the fact that Qin Wentian had the Azure Emperor token in his hands. Who do you think you are? Do you even have the qualifications to touch the Azure Emperor token? Qin Wentian retorted. De of my Di clan was captured by the 9 Mystical Palace, and the Azure Emperor token has gone missing. But now, it's actually in your hands. This can't help but cause me to suspect if you are someone from the 9 Mystical Palace. Although Di Qing wasn't as outstanding as Di Feng, he was extremely intelligent and had many schemes up his sleeves. He naturally knew that his Di clan wanted to take over the Azure Emperor Palace. If not, he wouldn't have allowed Di Feng to stay in the White Deer Institute for such a long time. Now that Qin Wentian had appeared with the Azure Emperor token in his hands, it was equivalent to spoiling their plans. This was unacceptable. Qin Wentian and a Heavenly Dipper sovereign were far from enough to protect the Azure Emperor Palace. Qin Wentian laughed as he kept the Azure Emperor token. After which, he stated, "Elders of the White Deer Institute, do you still want to watch the show? Isn't it about time for you all to come out?" As the sound of his voice faded, not a single person appeared. This caused Qin Wentian to understand how difficult it was to completely control a power that had been passed down for thousands of years. The other party was obviously doing this to show him. Leaving aside the fact that the situation was still unclear, even if the White Deer Institute had acknowledged his identity, if they didn't listen to him, Qin Wentian, what could he, Qin Wentian, do? A power that had been passed down for thousands of years, how could the White Deer Institute give up their authority to a 19-year-old Wuxiu? Not only that, they had to take the risk. Even if Di Feng had the support of the Di clan behind him, he still hadn't obtained the full approval of the White Deer Institute. They could only say that they respected Di Feng enough. At this moment, even though the elders of the White Deer Institute knew what was happening, they still refused to show themselves. They wanted to see how things would be handled. "You better explain your identity first," Bailu Tong coldly stated. "That's right, the Azure Emperor token. Let us see if it's real or fake." Bailu Yu coldly laughed. "You guys are too impudent." Bailu Yi didn't expect Bailu Tong and the others to be so difficult to deal with. Even after Qin Wentian had taken out the Azure Emperor token, they still ignored him. Not only that, the attitude of the elders also made Bailu Yi understand that Qin Wentian was still a lone wolf. The elders of the White Deer Institute didn't give him enough respect. Even if Qin Wentian had extraordinary talent, it didn't mean that the White Deer Institute would hand over all authority to Qin Wentian just because Qin Wentian had talent. This concerned the future of the White Deer Institute, and although Bailu Yi understood, she still felt extremely uncomfortable. At the very least, they should be more respectful towards Qin Wentian, right? Don't forget, earlier you said that you could die. Now, I want you to die. Qin Wentian glared at Bailu Yu, yet Bailu Yu only laughed maniacally. "Ridiculous, you haven't even proven your identity and you already want me to die. Seems like if I don't take a closer look at the secrets within your interspatial ring, I won't be able to do anything." Qing stepped forwards, standing in front of Qin Wentian, while Bailu Tong also took a step forward. "Ha, I want to take a look as well." Di Qing coldly laughed. Unknowingly, an old protector had appeared behind him. This old protector was also a Heavenly Dipper sovereign, and he stepped out together with Di Qing. At the same time, outside of the White Deer Institute, in the skies far away, a few gigantic demonic beasts could be seen hovering in the air. On the back of one of the demonic beasts, a demonic middle-aged man could be seen. The eyes of this middle-aged man shone with a demonic light, shining with a golden light that seemed to penetrate through space. Everything that happened on the grassy plains of the White Deer Institute appeared in front of him. After that, it transformed into a screen of light that was imprinted in the eyes of the demonic beasts and the people here. How impudent! It's been a few thousand years, yet these people have already forgotten the respect they should have for the Azure Emperor. Upon seeing the Azure Emperor token, not a single one of them had the slightest bit of respect. An old woman with a snake staff in her hand stared at the scene in front of her, as a baleful aura emanated from her. At the feet of the old woman, there was a corpse. If Qin Wentian was here, he would have instantly recognized it. This corpse was none other than the fourth-ranked inscriptionist grandmaster who had escaped earlier. Now, he was already a dead man. Indeed, they are too impudent. Not only did they not respect the Azure Emperor, they even dared to threaten him with words and even wanted to use violence. A skinny old man beside the old woman coldly spoke, his eyes flashing with a demonic light. Hee hee. A seductive laughter rang out as a sexy woman giggled. Not only that, those old fellows are still pretending to be oblivious, they haven't even come out yet. Do they want to see young Master Qin handle this yourself? Since those old fellows don't want to come out, why don't you guys handle it for them? At this moment, a middle-aged woman exuded an aura of coldness. As the sound of her voice faded, those demonic humans all started laughing. A raging wind gusted by as demonic beasts soared through the air. That demonic middle-aged man retracted his demonic eyes, and all of them sped towards that direction. At the same time, on the grassy plains, several silhouettes walked towards Qin Wentian, exuding a domineering aura. The supreme elders of the White Deer Institute still hadn't appeared, they were probably still waiting to see how things would develop. Although they wouldn't allow anything to happen to Qin Wentian, if they did so, it would still be extremely disrespectful to Qin Wentian, the successor of the Azure Emperor. Di Cheng and Bailu Yu walked towards Qin Wentian, while Qing and the golden-armored puppet appeared in front of Qin Wentian. Bailu Tong and Di Cheng's guards also took a few steps forwards. Successor of the Azure Emperor? I really want to take a good look. Di Cheng coldly laughed. You guys won't have the chance to see. At this moment, a voice drifted over from the air, causing the crowd to be startled. Inclining their heads, they stared in the direction of the voice, only to see a terrifying demonic chi drifting over. Who's there? At this moment, a few old men descended from the skies, and 3 of them appeared consecutively. These 3 old men were all supreme elders of the White Deer Institute. Only now did they discover that there were actually people spying on the White Deer Institute. It was just that the distance between them was too great, and they actually couldn't sense it. A raging wind gusted by as the silhouettes of terrifying demonic beasts floated in the air. Numerous demonic beasts stared coldly at the supreme elders of the White Deer Institute, and one of them coldly stated, "It's too late to come out now. We will handle this matter on behalf of the White Deer Institute." Who are you, and what do you mean by that? One of the supreme elders froze as he coldly asked. The old granny with the snake staff in her hand stared at him as she icily replied, "You don't need to care about who I am. As for what I mean, these 4 people offended their superiors, offending the Azure Emperor token, and disrespecting the successor of the Azure Emperor. Kill them without mercy." As the sound of the old granny's voice faded, a cold intent gushed forth, enveloping Di Cheng, Bailu Yu, Bailu Tong, as well as Di Cheng's guards. The cold eyes of the old granny caused an intense fear to blossom in their hearts. These people were here to protect Qin Wentian. They wanted to kill them all. Don't you dare! The clan elder roared angrily. These people wanted to kill him, and his children were among them. The demonic light in the old granny's eyes was akin to that of a venomous viper. Since the White Deer Institute dares to defy the Azure Emperor's orders, protecting those who offended their superiors, there's no longer a need for the Azure faction to exist. Chapter 288. In that case, there's no longer a need for the Azure faction to exist. Her voice drifted into the ears of those from the White Deer Institute, causing them to feel a chill in their hearts. The old woman was threatening to wipe out the entire White Deer Institute. Since you dared to protect a sinner who disrespected the successor of the Azure Emperor, what's the point of keeping the Azure faction alive? Who are you exactly? That Supreme Elder stared at the old woman. Each and every one of them exuded a towering aura that was incomparably terrifying. Just this level of strength alone was sufficient to create a storm of blood in the White Deer Institute. Not only that, there was obviously someone behind them. That person was definitely capable of leveling the entire White Deer Institute to the ground. I'm a protector of the Azure Emperor's successor. The old woman coldly replied. After which, she turned her gaze onto Di Cheng and the rest. The four of them had already been surrounded, and the terrifying aura they exuded made them feel a sense of death looming over them. We're only observing, we definitely won't do anything to the successor of the Azure Emperor. Sir, can you please show mercy? Another Supreme Elder pleaded. The appearance of these people undoubtedly proved Qin Wintian's identity. There shouldn't be any mistake. I believe you guys, but we're also observing. These people offended their superiors. Not only did they not have the most basic respect, they even dared to act against the person with the Azure Emperor token. As the sound of the old woman's voice faded, a corpse fell from the air. Upon seeing the corpse, the hearts of the crowd shuddered. This corpse was actually the Heavenly Dipper's sovereign inscriptionist who fought against Qin Wentian. Those from the White Deer Institute were observing, so were they. Since these people were so disrespectful, how could he not kill them today to establish his prestige? If not, thousands of years later, these people would have completely forgotten about the prestige of the Azure Emperor. They wouldn't even have the most basic respect for the successor of the Azure Emperor. I'm a descendant of the Di clan, the direct line of descent of the Azure Emperor. Di Cheng roared as he stared at the old woman, feeling the cold killing intent radiating from her. The old woman lowered her head, sweeping her gaze over to Di Cheng as she icily stated, as a descendant of the Di clan, you should remember the Azure Emperor's last words. You know your crimes, but you still chose to violate them. After saying that, the old woman waved the snake staff in her hand. A terrifying demonic snake roared and rushed out, opening its mouth wide in an attempt to devour Di Cheng. No! Di Cheng's face turned pale. He didn't expect these people to really want to kill him. He didn't want to die. A terrifying devouring power spread out. Di Cheng wanted to flee, but he was involuntarily swallowed into the demon snake's stomach. His entire body disappeared. It was an extremely tragic sight. This scene was too horrifying to behold. Di Cheng's guard wanted to flee, yet a withered old man blocked his path. Blasting out with a palm strike, a terrifying demonic chi enveloped the guard, and in an instant, the body of the guard was actually melted into nothingness by the demonic chi. What a terrifying willpower! Qin Wentian could sense that extremely strong willpower. If he were to touch even a little bit of it, he would probably die. He finally understood why DE was only responsible for the protection of the Emperor Star Academy's map. Only the refinement grounds of Fairy Qingmei could unlock the secrets of the map. The Azure Emperor had already predicted that after his death, the various transcendent powers wouldn't be so easily controlled by a successor of the younger generation. Fairy Qingmei was the person the Azure Emperor trusted the most. She was the one protecting his inheritance in the dark. Di Cheng and his guards were slaughtered in a domineering manner. When Di Feng witnessed this scene, a sharp light flashed in his eyes. He had already guessed where these people came from. Who would have thought that Fairy Qingmei's shadow would always be there? If this was the case, it would be even more difficult for him to become the leader of the Azure Emperor. As for Bailu Tong and Bailu Yu, their countenances turned ashen as they stared at Di Cheng's death. A sense of death enveloped their entire bodies. How could this be? Never would they have thought that in order to obtain the ancient scroll of the Ascendant, they would have to face the threat of death. Since you guys are the protectors of the Azure Emperor, why must you be so ruthless? Bailu Tong's father took a step forwards. How could he allow his son to die in front of him? Kill him. The baleful aura of the middle-aged woman standing in the air was still as cold as ever. Her gaze actually caused the clan elder to not dare to act rashly. Just the gaze of this middle-aged woman was enough to cause one's heart to palpitate. Her strength was definitely extremely terrifying. Ha! The seductive woman giggled as she flew downwards. The skinny old man waved his hand as a corrosive baleful aura enveloped the entire space. Buzz! A pair of terrifying wings materialized behind Bailu Tong's back as he soared through the air. However, he only saw a burly man stomping on the air, causing a thunderous boom to echo out. Bailu Tong's body was forcefully pushed back by the force of the pressure. The void was forcibly sealed by that terrible gravitational force. You've gone too far. A terrifying aura gushed forth from Bailu Tong's father. You'd better persuade him. The middle-aged woman glanced at the other elders and said, otherwise, I wouldn't care if White Deer Academy loses one elder. Art. Never in his wildest dreams would he have imagined that he would die in the White Deer Academy, die because of these people who came here to establish their dominance. Back then, the Azure Emperor didn't leave behind the hidden faction for you guys to enjoy a peaceful life. It was to welcome the appearance of the Azure Emperor's successor, to lead the Azure faction on a path of revival. As the descendants of the Azure faction, you guys naturally have the authority to test the successor. But if you guys don't even have the respect to respect him, the loss of the Azure faction wouldn't matter. The middle-aged woman's voice was as cold as ever as she continued, the White Deer Academy isn't the only branch of the hidden faction. Now, since young Master Qin has arrived here, you guys have the authority to decide how to follow him, and how much support you should give him. However, remember this, without the support of your White Deer Academy, the rise of the Azure faction wouldn't be affected. At that time, don't blame me for not reminding you all. If there comes a day when the Azure faction reunifies the entire Grand Xia, they would have to reorganize themselves. At that time, the choice would no longer be in your hands. Think carefully, if you want to be independent, you have to see if you have the qualifications to do so. Her words were laced with a hint of threat. Right now, your White Deer Academy had the authority to choose how much support you should give to Qin Wentian. In fact, Qin Wentian might not even be able to mobilize your White Deer Academy. But when he has the strength to command all the hidden factions, leading them to rise to power, would your White Deer Academy still be able to stand alone? At that time, how they would treat the White Deer Academy would depend on Qin Wentian's attitude. Regarding today's matter, my White Deer Academy is in the wrong. From afar, two silhouettes could be seen walking over. They were originally in closed-door seclusion, but now that someone had reported to them, they immediately rushed over. Right now, all 5 elders of the White Deer Institute were present. Bailu Yi's great-grandfather, who was also the clan leader of the White Deer Institute, took a few steps forward, staring at the middle-aged woman as he stated, I've already heard of the matter. The White Deer Institute has no objections to your decision. They were disrespectful to the successor of our ancestor, and should be killed. As the clan leader, he knew what he had to do. Regardless of whether the White Deer Institute chose to fully support Qin Wentian or not, at the very least, they couldn't afford to offend him. After all, with the support of this power, it would be difficult for Qin Wentian not to rise. Qin Wentian sighed in his heart. When it came to matters that implicated the interests of the White Deer Institute, talent alone wasn't enough. He didn't believe that without the Celestial Lake Palace's domineering attitude, the patriarch of the White Deer Institute would personally apologize. Puchi. A light sound rang out. The crowd turned their gazes towards Bailu Tong, as many of them drew in a deep breath. An elder of the White Deer Institute had fallen here today. Never in his wildest dreams would he have imagined that bringing a 4th-ranked grandmaster to pressure Qin Wentian would result in his own death. Too many experts had perished in this place today. Young Master Qin, is there anyone else you wish to settle today's matter? The White Deer Patriarch politely asked as he looked at Qin Wentian. Senior, you can just call me Wentian. Qin Wentian smiled. If Senior doesn't mind, can I address you as great-grandfather like Little E? Sure, in that case, this old man will take advantage of you. Seeing how polite Qin Wentian was, the white deer patriarch's mood softened. This young man wasn't bad, he didn't have any overbearing attitude. What are you saying, great-grandfather? Wentian didn't expect things to turn out this way. I have to apologize to great-grandfather, Qin Wentian said. Qin Wentian bowed, only to see the white deer patriarch waving his hands. It's this old man's fault for not being strict enough. It has nothing to do with you. As the grand elder, I can't absolve myself from the blame, the large-eyed elder added. Such a situation wasn't beneficial to either side, causing the White Deer Institute and Qin Wentian to have a grudge. It would be best if they could resolve this now. The Grand Elder has always treated me well. Wentian will remember this. Today's matter has nothing to do with the Grand Elder, the large-eyed elder said. Now, in order to establish their authority, the Celestial Lake Palace had killed the main culprits, Bailu Tong and his son. Not only that, the large-eyed elder had always treated him well. Qin Wentian didn't want to create a rift between him and the White Deer Institute because of this matter. Bluntly speaking, the White Deer Institute had disrespected him, but their positions were different. There was no need for him to hold a grudge. The eyes of the middle-aged woman in the air flickered with gentleness. She was extremely satisfied with Qin Wentian's actions. Today, she had established her authority. The Celestial Lake Palace would be the villain. But for Qin Wentian, he wanted to become the leader of the Azure faction. Naturally, he couldn't afford to fall out with the power he would control in the future. Shifting her gaze, the middle-aged woman's eyes landed on Di Feng. The sharpness in her eyes intensified as she stated, "Tell your elders that it's best if they remember the Azure Emperor's will." Di Feng's countenance was as calm as ever. He bowed slightly to the middle-aged woman as he replied, "Junior will listen to your teachings, I will definitely pass this message to my elders." The middle-aged woman's eyes gleamed with sharpness as she witnessed Di Feng's performance. Di Feng was the future leader of the Azure faction, and as expected, he had extraordinary points. Maybe, he would become a strong competitor for Qin Wentian in the future. However, to Qin Wentian, this was also a challenge. If he wanted to achieve what the Azure Emperor had done in the past, he would have to face many difficulties. Junior will return now to inform my elders about the matter regarding the successor of the Azure Emperor. Farewell. Di Feng clasped his hands to the crowd, before bowing to the various elders of the White Deer Institute, before turning and departing. Chapter 289. After Di Feng left, a group of silhouettes soared through the air, departing from the White Deer Institute. Naturally, they had already guessed who these people were. Today's events had already exceeded their expectations. With the appearance of the Azure Emperor token and the appearance of the Celestial Lake Palace, they all understood that it was impossible for them to complete their mission in the White Deer Institute. They could only temporarily leave. Not only that, this was an extremely ominous sign for their future plans. The Azure Emperor token already had an owner, and in addition, it had the support of Fairy Qingmei. In this case, if they wanted to control the hidden faction left behind by the Azure Emperor, it would be exceedingly difficult. Because Qin Wentian, the successor of the Azure Emperor, would also be able to do what they wanted, becoming the absolute leader of the hidden faction. To Di Feng, the only thing he could do now was to speed up his growth and increase his combat prowess to the heavens. With absolute strength, even the Azure Emperor token would be suppressed. After killing the four of them, only then did the people from the Celestial Lake Palace quiet down. They landed on the ground, and stared at Qin Wentian, as well as at Qin Wentian's side, Qing, Young Master Qin, Princess Qing, The crowd bowed to the two of them. Qin Wentian was the successor of the Azure Emperor, while Qing, was the person Fairy Qingmei doted on the most. In the Celestial Lake Palace, Princess Qing's status wasn't any lower than the palace mistress. Qing lightly nodded her head, as she quietly stood there. The people from the White Deer Institute stared at this breathtakingly beautiful maiden in shock. So it turned out that the fairy-like maiden beside Qin Wentian actually had such a terrifying status. These people all respectfully referred to her as Princess Qing. All of you, immediately seal off all news of this, do not let anyone else know. The patriarch of the White Deer Institute waved his hands as he spoke to the elders of the White Deer Institute. The events that happened here today would definitely attract the attention of the outside world. What they needed to do now was to make amends. Don't worry, we're descending from the sky. Besides the members of White Deer Academy, practically no one will be aware of our arrival. If we do our best, no one will be aware of our arrival. The middle-aged woman spoke to the White Deer Patriarch. Today, other than the Celestial Lake Palace, there were also the White Deer Institute and the D Clan. Although these people had different standpoints, none of them would allow the matter of the Azure faction to be exposed. Okay, I'll arrange it. The White Deer Patriarch lightly nodded his head. The news of the deaths of the fourth-ranked Grandmasters couldn't be hidden. After all, Wind Valley and a few others were present at the scene. The middle-aged woman arrived in front of Qin Wentian and Qing. She smiled at Qin Wentian. This dignified woman's smile was very beautiful. Did you bully my Qing heir? The middle-aged woman joked. Heir. Qin Wentian's eyes flashed. Bullying Qing heir? He couldn't even see Qing heir. This girl usually appeared and disappeared mysteriously. He didn't even know where she was. Senior sister, why did you bully me? Qing heir's beautiful eyes flickered as she spoke in a melodious voice, causing black lines to appear on Qin Wentian's forehead. This lass was so pure and adorable. The middle-aged woman laughed when she heard Qing heir's words. However, she was already used to it. She pulled Qing heir's arm as they walked to the side. Qing heir, master wants me to ask you a question, the middle-aged woman spoke in a low voice. The middle-aged woman spoke in a low voice, her words causing Qing heir's beautiful eyes to blink as she replied in a low voice, what does master want to ask? Master wants to ask you, do you like him? A crafty glint flashed in the eyes of the middle-aged woman. How was this something Fairy Qing Mei wanted her to ask? It was obvious that she wanted to tease the pure and innocent junior sister Qing heir. How could the pitiful Qing heir know so much? An expression of contemplation appeared on her face as she seriously replied, I don't know. Qin Wentian, who was at the side, rolled his eyes. Although their voices were soft, he could still hear them clearly. What do you think of him? The middle-aged woman smiled. Qing heir's eyelashes fluttered as she turned her head to glance at Qin Wentian. Very adorable. Cough cough. Qin Wentian's forehead was filled with black lines as he heard Qing heir's voice. Incomparable melancholy filled his heart. Very adorable, the pure and innocent Qing heir still remembered his explanation of the word adorable back then. The middle-aged woman couldn't help but laugh out loud. After which, she turned her head and stared at Qin Wentian with a smile that was not a smile on her face, only to see an expression of awkwardness on Qin Wentian's face. Little sister Qing heir is the apple of master's eye. You have to take good care of my Qing heir. The middle-aged woman said with a smile. Although she was smiling, she couldn't help but exude a sense of majesty. Her status in the Celestial Lake Palace was obviously very high. This time, she had personally brought people here to intimidate those people, so that they would remember her in their hearts. Senior, actually, Qing heir has always been the one taking care of me. Qin Wentian felt somewhat ashamed. Ever since he met Qing heir, she had always been the one protecting him in the dark. It's good that you know. If I found out that you bullied her, I won't forgive you. The middle-aged woman was extremely concerned about Qing heir. She couldn't help but repeatedly remind Qin Wentian. Although she spoke in a joking tone, her tone didn't seem to be fake. Her true feelings were hidden in her words. At the side, the people from the White Deer Institute were extremely quiet. At this moment, they were thinking in their hearts, if this woman was already so terrifying, who was her master? As for the 5 elders of the White Deer Institute, they had already guessed who the person who had come was. They also had a clear understanding of Qing'er's status. All right, Qing'er, we have to return. The middle-aged woman spoke to Qing'er, only to see Qing'er lightly nodding her head. She didn't try to persuade them to stay. The middle-aged woman was already familiar with her temperament and naturally wouldn't blame her. This fairy-like junior apprentice sister of hers was so pure and adorable that she didn't even eat the food of the mortal world. Take good care of Qing'er. The middle-aged woman turned to Qin Wentian as she spoke. Qin Wentian lightly nodded his head as he asked, Senior, are we leaving now? Emicham, we've already done what we needed to do. Most of the time, you still have to rely on yourself. Don't expect us to give you any help. As the successor of the Azure Emperor, it's impossible for you to rely on the strength of others. After speaking, the middle-aged woman soared up into the air. A terrifying gust of wind enveloped her as a pair of gigantic wings appeared on her back. One figure after another soared into the sky, rising higher and higher. They rushed into the clouds and gradually disappeared from everyone's sight. They had arrived in a grandiose manner, but they had left in silence. Those from the Celestial Lake Palace only wanted to do one thing. They wanted to help Qin Wentian establish his prestige, and let those from the Qin clan know of Fairy Qingmei's attitude. After the departure of those from the Celestial Lake Palace, those from the White Deer Institute heaved a sigh of relief. The eyes of the White Deer Patriarch stared into the distance, as a look of contemplation appeared on his face. Wentian, from now on, you can stay in the White Deer Institute with peace of mind. If there's anything you need, just tell Little E, or come look for me, the White Deer Patriarch stated to Qin Wentian. Okay. Qin Wentian smiled as he nodded his head. The attitude of the White Deer Patriarch was completely different from before. From today onwards, seeing Wentian is the same as seeing me. However, this matter cannot be revealed in front of outsiders. The White Deer Patriarch spoke to the crowd. Wentian, you should be able to understand this point, right? Great-grandfather, don't worry, Wentian understands. Qin Wentian smiled. There's one more thing that I've discussed with Little E before. Even if I truly control the White Deer Institute, I won't casually order the White Deer Institute to do anything, and I won't allow the Institute to be in danger. Before I have absolute strength, I won't reveal the relationship between the White Deer Institute and the Azure faction. Emicham, I understand what you mean. However, this White Deer Institute has a long history, and there are some things that I can't make the decision alone. The White Deer Patriarch continued, I'll call for a meeting of the doyens now. If there's any decision, I'll inform you. At this moment, the White Deer Patriarch's intention of calling for a meeting of the doyens went without saying. Evidently, it was for the sake of him, the successor of the Azure Emperor. Everyone, please inform the doyens of the White Deer Institute, the White Deer Patriarch instructed. The White Deer Institute had a history of over 1,000 years, and its foundations were extremely deep. Naturally, the White Deer Institute didn't only have the 5 patriarchs and the 9 doyens. There were also the doyens from the previous generation, and even the doyens from the previous generation before that. Many of them were extremely powerful, and they were all doyens. It was just that they didn't manage the affairs of the White Deer Institute and were either cultivating or roaming the world. Unless something major happened, the White Deer Institute wouldn't summon them. The crowd nodded their heads in agreement. It had been too long since the White Deer Institute had summoned the doyens. Let's go. The White Deer Patriarch spoke to an elder beside him. That elder glanced at Qin Wentian, his eyes gleaming with sharpness. This elder was none other than Bailu Tong's father. Qin Wentian knew that after today's events, this elder would definitely hate him. But he believed that since the White Deer Patriarch had already expressed his stance, he would definitely handle this matter well. After the 5 patriarchs departed, the large-eyed elder walked up and patted Qin Wentian's shoulder as he smiled, Don't take today's events to heart. A 19-year-old grandmaster, your talent in the martial path can even cause others to overlook it. Being able to obtain the inheritance of the Azure Emperor, as well as gaining the approval of the Celestial Lake Palace, I can already imagine that your talent in the martial path isn't inferior to that of the Tao of Divine Inscriptions. It's just that your talent has been masked by the Divine Inscriptions. Work hard, even without the White Deer Institute. I believe that your name will shake the entire Grand Xia. Grand Elder praises me too much. Didn't everything go well today? Qin Wentian laughed, as the large-eyed elder nodded his head in agreement. The news of Qin Wentian becoming a fourth-ranked divine inscriptionist soon circulated around. It was impossible to hide this news. A 19-year-old divine inscriptionist soon caused a commotion in the eastern region of the Moon continent, and even attracted the attention of the star-seizing manor. A 19-year-old fourth-ranked divine inscriptionist appearing in the Moon continent? This had never happened before in the history of the Moon continent. Sadly, there weren't any transcendent powers in the Moon continent that paid attention to divine inscriptions. If Qin Wentian was in the War continent, there would definitely be too many transcendent powers vying for him. Naturally, even in the Moon continent, there were many transcendent powers that started to investigate this genius, hoping to recruit him. As for the Lin clan in the eastern region of the Moon continent, when they heard this news, those in the upper echelons of the Moon continent who knew of the grudge between Qin Wentian and the Lin clan, were so angered that they almost vomited blood. Chapter 290. Qin Wentian's name was extremely unfamiliar to the upper echelons of the Lin clan. Only a few elders knew of him. Back then, Leng Mao had a grudge with Qin Wentian because of Leng Ning, and Qin Wentian had defeated Yen Tai, depriving the Leng clan of the opportunity to participate in the refinement grounds. Under such circumstances, Leng Mao naturally chose to suppress the matter of Qin Wentian. But now, when the news of Qin Wentian becoming a fourth-ranked grandmaster circulated around the Leng clan, this matter could no longer be suppressed. Soon, the ins and outs of the whole thing were thoroughly figured out and spread throughout the Leng family. In the great hall of the Leng clan, there were many people gathered. Other than some of the upper echelons, there were also a few elders, Leng Ning's uncle Leng Jian, Leng Ning's cousin Leng Lin, as well as those who were related to Leng Ning's death. The atmosphere in the great hall was solemn, as though there was a sense of oppression. A fourth-ranked grandmaster at the age of 19 could have been a very good friend of my Leng clan. But now, he's been pushed to the side of the Leng clan's mortal enemy. Hee, what have you guys done? The person seated at the head of the hall was a sturdy old man. His gaze swept over Leng Jian, Leng Ning, and the rest, causing them to lower their heads, not daring to breathe too loudly. During the exchange of the star-seizing manor, Qin Wentian had spared no expense to kill Yen Tai. From this, one could see that Qin Wentian was determined to avenge Leng Ning. How could Qin Wentian not bear a grudge against the Leng clan? He hadn't taken revenge yet because he didn't have enough strength. However, once Qin Wentian joined a transcendent power, or if he grew stronger, the Leng clan would definitely suffer the wrath of the Leng clan. The hatred of a 19-year-old fourth-ranked grandmaster was something that could not be ignored. Initially, the Leng clan intended to hand Leng Lin over to Yen Tai. Is that true? Leng Mao nodded his head. That's indeed the case. After that, Leng Lin found a companion, and with Leng Jian's pleading, it was changed to Leng Ning. Is there a shortage of maids at the weapon refining hall? The old man asked. At that instant, Leng Lin's face turned deathly pale. No, the Leng clan was a clan that focused on researching divine inscriptions. In the Leng clan, there was a specialized weaponsmithing hall where weaponsmiths gathered. Among these weaponsmiths, there were divine inscriptionists of the Leng clan, as well as guest divine inscriptionists. When they were refining tools or cultivating martial arts, they also needed maidservants to take care of them. Occasionally, these people would also do the deed between men and women to vent their lust. So, naturally, they would find maidservants. Therefore, the maidservants of the big clans were all very beautiful ordinary people. They had no status. It was fine if they met a good person, but if they met a bad person, they would be abused. Don't want it. Don't tell me that no one needs to take responsibility for this matter. The dignified old man glanced at Leng Lin and said coldly, tell the person in charge of the refining hall that this is the young lady of the Leng family. The reward will be given to the refining grandmaster. Father, save me. Leng Lin screamed to Leng Jian. Leng Jian's face was flushed red, yet he was doing his best to endure it. Now, he couldn't even protect himself. Leng Jian, you will be sent to the refining hall as an odd job servant for 10 years. The dignified old man spoke again, causing Leng Jian's body to tremble as an expression of agony appeared on his face. Being an odd job servant meant that he had to help the Grandmaster inscriptionists temper their embryos and refine the materials required for the forging of weapons. He was treated as a servant, and from then on, he became a lowly person, a servant, akin to a pig or a dog. Leng Mao, as a managing elder, you are also guilty. Bring some generous gifts and go to the White Deer Institute to apologize, resolving this grudge. The dignified middle-aged man spoke again. Leng Mao nodded his head as he sighed in his heart. He didn't expect things to turn out like this. If he knew back then that Qin Wentian's talent in divine inscriptions was so high, how could he have forced Leng Ning to commit suicide? Although Qin Wendian had caused a huge wave of commotion in the eastern region of the Moon Continent, and his fame had already spread throughout the entire Moon Continent, it was as though nothing had happened to him. He was still cultivating in the back mountain of the White Deer Institute. After the death of those fourth-ranked grandmasters, the treasures they left behind naturally became Qin Wendian's. The treasures of these grandmasters were all extremely abundant. There was no need to mention the Yuan meteor stones, the third-ranked divine weapons were tossed around like trash, and there were also many precious materials and medicinal herbs. If all these were exchanged for Yuan meteor stones, it would be sufficient to support Qin Wendian's cultivation for a very long time. If that was the case, he wouldn't even need to go to the Hell Arena to earn Yuan meteor stones. Naturally, the most valuable treasures were still the fourth-ranked puppet, as well as the few fourth-ranked divine weapons. Sadly, the grandmasters he killed had limited attainments in the Tao of divine inscriptions, and weren't among the most powerful fourth-ranked grandmasters. Seems like I have to find a place to sell off those things I don't need, and exchange them for the cultivation materials I need, Qin Wendian mused. Boss, do you have any more good stuff? Give me more to play with. Fan Lu, who was at the side, was currently playing with a third-ranked divine weapon. His eyes flickered with a strange light as he instigated Qin Wendian. Forget it, your cultivation base isn't very high. These few divine weapons are more than enough for you to use. Qin Wendian rolled his eyes. This damnable fatty had already coveted 5 of his top-tier third-ranked divine weapons. Hee, if I could have some fourth-ranked divine weapons to play with, that would be even better. Fan Lu grinned, causing Qin Wendian to be speechless. They couldn't even unleash the full power of fourth-ranked divine weapons, and relying too much on them would only be detrimental to their growth. When you step into Heavenly Dipper, I'm afraid I'll be able to easily forge a fourth-ranked divine weapon myself. Why would I be afraid of not having any divine weapons to use? Qin Wendian mocked. Fan Li's eyes flickered. Chu Mang, on the other hand, was extremely quiet. He stood at the side and played with the great axe Qin Wendian had given him. He only chose 2 divine weapons, one was an attack-type great axe, and the other was a divine armor. Sadly, he didn't have a fourth-ranked defensive divine armor. If not, he could have gifted it to Qing as a present. Divine weapons and armors were extremely precious, and not something ordinary fourth-ranked grandmasters would be able to forge. Hence, even the few fourth-ranked grandmasters killed by Qin Wendian didn't have a single one of them. We're not done yet. From afar, Bai Lui walked over with a smile on her face. Alright, is there anyone else looking for me? Qin Wendian smiled. During this period of time, there were many who came to visit him, but he rejected them all. Not only was he a genius divine inscriptionist, he also had the ancient scroll of the Ascendant in his possession. With regards to foreign powers, it was impossible for him to join them just because he didn't know what they were thinking. Even in the White Deer Institute, wasn't there someone like Bai Lu Tong who wanted to kill him and seize the ancient scroll of the Ascendant? Initially I didn't want to disturb you, but there are a few powers that are a little special, so I had to inform you about them. Bai Lu Yi retrieved a book and passed it to Qin Wentian. This is a brief introduction to the various powers in Grand Xia, you can try to understand them. Right. Qin Wentian received the book. He really needed to understand these things. After coming to the Moon continent, other than the 4 transcendent powers, he wasn't very clear about the other powers. Currently, there are 3 powers that have come to pay their respects. The first one is the Star River Association. You should have heard of it before. Bai Lu Yi's words caused Qin Wentian's countenance to stiffen. He naturally knew of the Star River Association. It existed in the Chu country. In his impression, the Star River Association was extremely mysterious and powerful. Although it was open to the public, it didn't interfere in the affairs of the outside world. However, the power of the Star River Association was extremely terrifying, and no other powers dared to antagonize it. I've heard of it before. In my hometown, there's also a Star River Association. Qin Wentian replied. Not only did the Star River Association exist in the Chu country, there was also a branch in the Sky Harmony City. The Star River Association is a special power that can be found throughout Grand Xia. Although they appear to be low profile and rarely participate in the affairs of the outside world, their foundations are extremely terrifying. Not only that, they are extremely proficient in recruiting outstanding individuals. Regardless of alchemists, weaponsmiths, or stellar martial cultivators, they would always recruit them in secret. Many people in Grand Xia have speculated that the Star River Association is like a pyramid, with layers upon layers of hierarchy. Their management is extremely strict, and those at the bottom might not have a high status, but they have the opportunity to climb up. As for where the Star River Association originated from, there are rumors saying that they originated from outside the royal capital of Grand Xia. Even the Star River Association in the various cities of Grand Xia are nothing but subordinates of the Star River Association, Bai Lu Yi explained. The Star River Association is actually so powerful. Qin Wentian was somewhat taken aback. Back in Chu, he had heard rumors that the Star River Association had branches throughout the various cities. And now, the Grand Xia Empire was actually in a similar situation. This level of influence was simply too terrifying, simply too shocking. Maybe the Star River Association in Chu couldn't be considered much, but it was still a pyramid. Just like what Bai Lu Yi had said, the Star River Association was like a pyramid. How terrifying would the people at the top be? There are rumors that the Star River Association has interacted with many rankers on the Heavenly Dipper rankings and Heavenly Fate rankings. In fact, there are even quite a few of them who are honored guests of the Star River Association. Although it's just a nominal title, they still have a connection with the Star River Association. Now that they're here to look for you, it's most likely because they know that you're a 19-year-old 4th-ranked Grandmaster, and they wish to recruit you. Bai Lu Yi's words caused Qin Wentian to be silently shocked. He didn't have a good impression of the Star River Association. Back then, Murin's despicable actions had almost caused the deaths of many members of his Qin clan. The second power is similarly extraordinary, the Thousand Ju Alliance. Bai Lu Yi introduced, the Thousand Ju Alliance is the strongest alliance of unaffiliated cultivators in Grand Xia. Because unaffiliated cultivators are usually alone, they would be at a disadvantage if they were to clash with the major powers. Hence, a few thousand years ago, the Thousand Ju Alliance was established in Grand Xia by a few extremely powerful unaffiliated cultivators. As long as you contribute enough to the Thousand Ju Alliance, you'll be able to enjoy a certain level of authority. This is a transcendent power, but they aren't based in the Moon continent. However, there are still some of their people in the Moon continent. I'm afraid they're here to recruit you. Bai Lu Yi continued, as for the third power, it's none other than the Leng clan. Leng Mao is here to apologize, and wishes to resolve the grudge between you and him. A cold light flickered in Qin Wentian's eyes. The Leng clan wanted Leng Mao to apologize? How ridiculous. Chapter 291. Not only did Qin Wentian have a cold glint in his eyes, even Fan Lu, who was standing beside him, was instantly engulfed in the flames of hatred. His entire person seemed to explode as the terrifying flames on his body ignited. Fan Lu had personally witnessed Leng Ning's death. He would never forget the scene of her being forced to her death by the Leng clan and Yen Tai. Boss, you told me before that this Leng Mao was the one who gave the order, right? Fan Lu turned his gaze onto Qin Wentian. Qin Wentian nodded his head. I want him to die. I can't accept this. Leng Jian, Leng Lin, they all deserve to die. Fan Li's eyes were bloodshot. This was the first time Qin Wentian saw such a crazed expression on his face. I heard that the Leng clan has already punished Leng Jian and Leng Lin. Bai Lui continued, the Leng clan should know that Leng Mao was the one who gave the order, hence they sent him here to apologize. Apologize? Fan Lu coldly laughed. Back then, not only did he force Leng Ning to her death, he even wanted to kill you, me, and Chu Mang. At that time, you weren't in the Leng clan, hence you were able to escape. Leng Ning sent me out of the Leng clan in advance, saving her life. That's not enough. The Leng clan knows that you are a third-rank divine inscriptionist, they have no intentions of letting you off. It was Leng Ning who lied to the Leng clan before she died, telling them that you and Bai Lui were in love with each other. This was the reason why the Leng clan didn't dare to act against you. After which, Leng Ning committed suicide. Fan Li's voice was hoarse as he roared in a low voice, now, is there any use in apologizing? What does all of this count for? What does Leng Ning's death count for? Who? Qin Wentian drew in a deep breath. Hearing Fan Lu narrate the details of Leng Ning's death, he couldn't help but think of that pitiful young girl. She shouldn't have died like this. Maybe he didn't have the qualifications to care about the Leng clan, but he was acquainted with Leng Ning. Someone had to be responsible for her death. Definitely. Not only that, he, Chu Mang and Fan Lu had no grudges with the Leng clan. Leng Mao had wanted to kill them just to please Yen Tai. How strong is Leng Mao? Qin Wentian asked. Leng Mao is an elder of the Leng clan, and has just broken through to Heavenly Dipper. The Leng clan doesn't want you to bear a grudge against them, hence they chose to deal with Leng Jian and Leng Lin, who aren't that important to the Leng clan. But to deal with a Heavenly Dipper elder, they couldn't bear to do so. Hence, they only came here to apologize, Bai Lui explained. Yes. Qin Wentian nodded. I'll wait for him here. Ask the people of the Leng clan to come with me. Qin Wentian spoke to Bai Lui. Bai Lui inclined her head to look at him before nodding her head and turning away. Not long after, Leng Mao and a few others from the Leng clan arrived. Glancing at Qin Wentian from afar, Leng Mao smiled as he stated, Grandmaster Qin, you're so young yet you're already a fourth-ranked Grandmaster. Your future prospects are limitless. Sit. Qin Wentian stretched out his hand, pointing to a patch of grass in front of him as he spoke to Leng Mao. Leng Mao walked to a spot not far from Qin Wentian. Shaking his head, he stated, Today, I, Leng Mao, have come here to apologize, I won't be sitting. The matter with Leng Ning in the past is something that my Leng clan is ashamed of. Now, I've already dealt with the main culprits, Leng Jian and Leng Lin. If that's the case, I have to thank Senior. Qin Wentian laughed. As though sensing the sarcasm in Qin Wentian's words, Leng Mao bitterly smiled, I was forced to do so, I hope Grandmaster Qin won't hold it against me. Today, I'm here with sincerity. This interspatial ring contains a small token of my Leng clan's sincerity. Qin Wentian didn't accept the ring, he merely snorted coldly. Leng Mao continued, if Grandmaster Qin is still dissatisfied, feel free to let me know if you have any requests. In my Leng clan, other than Leng Ning, there are still a few other beauties that are more outstanding than her. If Grandmaster Qin is interested, you can choose one of them to be your concubine. This again. This Leng Mao had completely treated the women of his clan as sacrificial pawns. As long as they were in line with his interests, they could be sacrificed. After all, in the martialist continent, the status of women in major clans was lower than that of men. The more talented the men were, the more they would be able to bring glory to the clan, while the women would often be married off to other clans. The exception was if there were some extremely outstanding women, the clan would choose a son-in-law for them to marry into their clan. In major clans, many women were sacrificed for marriage alliances. Qin Wentian was already a 4th-ranked grandmaster at such a young age. If he could improve his relationship with Leng Mao, it would definitely be worth it. I do have a request, but I'm not sure if Senior would agree. Qin Wentian laughed. Leng Mao laughed. Grandmaster Qin, feel free to speak. I want you to die. As the sound of Qin Wentian's voice faded, he abruptly stood up. Abruptly, the entire ground lit up as the terrifying glow of divine inscriptions enveloped the entire area. A surge of sword chi swept through the air. Qin Wentian had already repaired the sword's cyclone tempest, and as he soared into the air, boundless sword chi enveloped him. The faces of those behind Leng Mao turned ashen, while Leng Mao coldly stared at Qin Wentian. As expected of a 4th-ranked grandmaster, your divine inscriptions are indeed powerful. However, if the White Deer Institute wants to kill me, it wouldn't be too appropriate. Although divine inscriptions of this level could cause him some trouble, as long as the people from the White Deer Institute didn't act, they wouldn't be able to threaten his life. Qin Wentian waved his palms, and in an instant, 2 4th-ranked puppets and 5 peak-level 3rd-ranked puppets appeared in the air, hovering above Leng Mao. Their cold gazes caused the scalps of those who saw them to go numb. This matter has nothing to do with the White Deer Institute. The people you brought here will naturally report back. The killing intent in Qin Wentian's voice intensified. You are the one who gave the order, how can you still be alive? Kill. As the sound of Qin Wentian's voice faded, the puppets all lunged forward. These puppets were his spoils of war, and he had already refined them, allowing them to carry out his will. With a wave of his hand, a terrifying gigantic sword slashed out, while the sword's cyclone tempest also swept towards Leng Mao. Leng Mao paled. Never in his wildest dreams would he have imagined that even without the help of the White Deer Institute, Qin Wentian would still have such terrifying strength. There were 2 4th-ranked puppets among the puppets, and they were more than enough to trap him here. Grandmaster Qin, we can discuss this further. Leng Mao's astral nova whistled out, colliding with the sword puppet. Leng Mao was completely suppressed, he could only condense a single astral nova. The terrifying finger light from the golden-armored puppet shot towards him, lacerating everything in its path. The other peak-tier 3rd-ranked puppets also took this opportunity to launch their own attacks, and in addition to the sword's cyclone tempest, Leng Mao had no time to deal with them. Leng Mao, maybe you didn't care about Leng Ning's death back then, and that's why that order wasn't even worth mentioning to you. However, there's someone who cares. Hence, you shall be buried together with Leng Ning. Fan Lu, who was outside the formation, roared in rage. Leng Mao, who had collided with the golden-armored puppet, had no way to defend against the sword's cyclone tempest, and his body was directly pierced through. Spare me! Leng Mao screamed. However, the golden-armored puppet's fist slammed into his chest, and the terrifying force of the impact caused Leng Mao's body to be on the verge of breaking apart. A burst of sword chi whistled past, instantly tearing Leng Mao's body apart. Below, the members of the Leng clan watched on with trepidation, their hearts pounding. Elder Leng Mao had died. This young, 4th-ranked grandmaster was truly terrifying. With just a thought, he could kill them all. However, at this moment, the tempest gradually subsided. The golden-armored puppets hovering in the air caused their hearts to tremble. Qin Wentian slowly walked over, and with a wave of his hand, a list of names appeared in his hands. Leng Ning was someone from the Leng clan. Maybe some of you know her. She was ruthlessly forced to her death by Leng Mao's order, and I don't wish for the innocent to die because of this. Since the Leng clan didn't want to punish the main culprit, Leng Mao, I killed him myself. Other than Leng Jian and Leng Lin, there are a few others who participated in this matter. Qin Wentian coldly stated, you guys can go back and report. The members of the Leng clan felt as though they had been pardoned from a great crime. Watching them depart, Qin Wentian inclined his head and gazed at the drifting clouds in the sky as he murmured, Leng Ning, I believe that the kind-hearted you wouldn't wish for the innocent to die. For every grievance, there must be a perpetrator, and for every debt, there must be a debtor. Those who caused your death will definitely pay with their lives. If the Leng clan continues to act this way, it would only be a matter of time before they die. Fan Lu also gazed at the skies, hoping that Leng Ning would be able to rest in peace. Let's go and meet with the people from the Star River Association first. Qin Wentian spoke to Bailu Yi. He had no idea how deep the foundations of this mysterious and powerful power were, but he wanted to see what the Star River Association wanted to do. Okay. Bailu Yi nodded as she led Qin Wentian away. They came to a courtyard in the academy, where the people from the Star River Association were arranged to rest. Junior is late, please forgive me. Qin Wentian saw that there were many people in the courtyard, and his gaze soon landed on a middle-aged man sitting on a stone chair. This middle-aged man had a calm demeanor, and when he saw Qin Wentian, a sharp glint of sharpness flashed in his eyes. But very quickly, it dissipated into nothingness as he smiled at Qin Wentian. Grandmaster Qin is too polite. You are indeed as young as the rumors say, a genius, an absolute genius. Senior praises me too much. Qin Wentian smiled as he sat down on a stone chair. Senior, why have you come to look for me? Since Grandmaster Qin has asked, I will speak frankly. The middle-aged man smiled. I'm the weaponsmith hall master of the Moon Continent Star River Association. I heard of Grandmaster Qin's talent in divine inscriptions, and wish to invite you to join our weaponsmith hall. I can directly appoint you as the vice leader of our weaponsmith hall. How about it? When Qin Wentian heard this, he understood that the Star River Association in the various regions were all very similar. The Star River Association here also had a weaponsmithing hall. Most probably, this vice hall master had only given him this position because of his potential. Senior, I, Qin, am afraid to accept your invitation. It's just that this junior has no interest in weaponsmithing. Hence, I can only apologize. Qin Wentian smiled. The Star River Association was a mysterious place, and the hierarchy was extremely strict. He naturally didn't want to be tied down by the Star River Association. However, with regards to such a powerful existence, if he didn't even meet with them, it would be too disrespectful. Hence, he could only tactfully reject. Grandmaster Qin, are you not going to consider it? The position of vice leader of the Weaponsmith Hall is a position that many fourth-ranked divine inscriptionists yearn for. Grandmaster Qin has just stepped into the fourth-ranked divine inscriptionist realm, yet the Star River Association is already giving you such a position. An old man at the side, who seemed to be an inscriptionist proficient in weaponsmithing, persuaded Qin Wentian. I, Qin, can't force myself to do something I'm not interested in. I can only thank you for your kind intentions. Qin Wentian continued to reject. The middle-aged man could only smile when he saw that Qin Wentian had no intentions of considering. In that case, is Grandmaster Qin willing to become a guest elder of our Star River Association? In the future, we can always keep in touch, and you can also enjoy certain benefits. Guest elder again. Qin Wentian involuntarily thought back to the time when Murin had lied to him. The position of guest elder had no meaning to him, and he didn't want to have any entanglements with the Star River Association. Hence, he could only reject again. This junior is used to living a carefree life. I won't take up the position of a guest elder of the Star River Association. Qin Wentian rejected again. How could these people from the Star River Association not understand Qin Wentian's meaning? They could only reply, since this is the case, we will take our leave. Seniors, Please take care. Qin Wentian clasped his hands as he saw the other party standing up, a faint smile on his face. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.